Who is the most hated villain of all time? Is it Darth Vader? Is it Draco Malfoy? Is it Khan from Star Trek II? Voldemort? Sauron? Is it Newman? Is it Biff from Back to the Future? Is it Skeletor? Or is it Agent Smith? Well, up until a couple of years ago, most people would say that the most hated villain of all time was none of these people. It was Joffrey Baratheon. Everyone hated Joffrey Baratheon. But George Martin has created a villain, another villain, even more hated than Joffrey. And that villain's name is Ramsay. After making my episode on the psychology of Joffrey Baratheon 1 or 2 years ago, I got many emails asking for another episode on the psychology of Ramsay Snow or Ramsay Bolton. For months, I would get these emails, and I didn't want to make an episode about Ramsay because I thought he was just too evil and too one-dimensional to make an interesting episode out of it. It's just like, well, what can you say about his personality and his psychology? He's just like, he's messed up. But more and more people asked, so... and the season 6 is about to come out. So I thought, well, okay, I'll start looking into it. And when I looked into it, I found that he's actually quite a complex character. He's definitely evil, but there are some things that you can definitely point to in his development that might help us understand why Ramsay is the way that he is. This is the Psychology in Seattle podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Kirk Honda. I am chair of the Couple and Family Therapy Program at Antioch University, Seattle, and I'm also a licensed therapist. Today it's just me, and I thought I would analyze Ramsay Bolton, Ramsay Snow. I thought I would give the history, and at the end I'll provide my diagnosis and some quotes from the books and the TV show. All right. Well, first off, I just want to provide a little bit of an intro. About 10 years ago, I received the audiobook from a friend of mine. He gave it to me, and he said that this new book called Game of Thrones is amazing. And I remember I was bored in the car, and this is before podcasting, so it was all audiobooks for me when I commuted. And I put in this audiobook, and at first I hated it. I thought, how is this amazing? It's so there's so many names, and I don't understand where they are. They seem to be on Earth, but not really on Earth, and so I just kept listening because I didn't have anything else to listen to. But I was pretty sure that I was going to give up on it pretty soon. And then suddenly it just hit me. I think it was when Eddard and Robert are talking in the catacombs underneath Winterfell. And again, all these names of people and blah, 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 and references to things long past. And I don't know. But somehow the feeling of the story or the vibe that George Martin really captures well just got to me. And I said to myself, I don't care that I don't know all the references. I just love this story. I know enough about each of the main characters to follow the story, and it feels like a real world because there's all these names that they keep throwing around without really explaining. Similar to Tolkien, right? When you read Tolkien, it's the same thing. You find that the main characters you can follow, but you just get all these references to this broader world, and it makes it feel realer, if that makes any sense. So it suddenly hit me, and I was hooked, and I became a huge fan. Then I consumed all the books, and then I heard that a TV show was being made. And at first I was worried greatly because I've seen what happens when TV producers decide to make TV shows out of my favorite nerd books. But before, and to some extent, as time goes on, I'm getting tired of the Lord of the Rings movies, especially the Hobbit movies. I mean, I watch them and they're okay, but back when I was a kid, when I loved Tolkien in the 70s and 80s, there were movies made from The Hobbit, and the Hobbit one isn't so bad, but the Lord of the Rings like cartoon / live action is terrible. The Dune TV series was a little silly at times. So I was skeptical, but when it came out, I was very pleasantly surprised that it was actually really well made, and I really liked it. The production just seemed way beyond what I thought it was going to be. I thought it was going to be like a bunch of B actors running around in cardboard costumes and bad acting. In my head, I thought it was going to be like, what was that TV show in the 90s? It was Xena the Warrior Princess or whatever. That's just how I imagined it was going to be. But it ended up turning out really well, and then surprisingly, it became hugely popular among non-nerds. Because back in the day, as a lifetime nerd, and just to flash my nerd credentials, I have been playing Dungeons and Dragons since almost the time of Dungeons and Dragons inception, when Gary Gygax first put pen to paper. I've been playing Dungeons and Dragons and still do as a 45-year-old professional man. So professional man, that's a funny. I'm a professional man. No, I'm a professional, and I'm also a man. So as a nerd, when anything that is super nerdy, like A Song of Ice and Fire, whenever it becomes popular, I'm always like, why this? Out of all the thousands of nerdy things that nerds are interested in, why this so suddenly? And I think it's just because it's such an amazing show. But at the same time, it is a little perplexing that people would be interested in this subject matter, because it's so, I don't know, it just isn't the typical thing that people are interested in, like, 2.5 Men and that kind of stuff. And now, season 6 is about to come out, depending on when you're going to listen to this. So I thought I would oblige the listeners by analyzing the psychology of Ramsay Bolton, or Ramsay Snow, depending on where you are in the storyline. Okay, so just to be clear, Ramsay is a character in the book series titled A Song of Ice and Fire. Some people might be surprised that A Game of Thrones is actually only the first book in the book series called A Song of Ice and Fire. So the TV show really should be called A Song of Ice and Fire, but I can see why they went with Game of Thrones, because Game of Thrones is a much better title than A Song of Ice and Fire. I mean, A Song of Ice and Fire is really kind of a silly name when you think about it. And the Game of Thrones was first introduced in the mid 1990s, I think, and it became a hit TV series about 5 years ago. Again, it was penned by the American author George R.R. Martin, or just George Martin. And whenever I hear or listen or see interviews with Martin, I am always thinking I think he's a gamer. I'm pretty sure that many of his stories emerged out of Dungeons and Dragons games. I don't know if that's apocryphal, but he just seems like an older version of nerds that I played D&D with. And it's just so awesome because, for him to rise to such power, even though it just seems like, one of our fellow nerds has risen to popularity. Okay. Ramsay, the character, was introduced in the second book, which was published in 98, A Clash of Kings. He is not a point of view character in the novels. If you haven't read the novels, the books, each chapter is from a different point of view. So it'll say like, Sansa, and then that chapter will be completely from Sansa's point of view, or Tyrion. And there's only certain characters that Martin actually tells the story from their point of view. Well, Ramsay it's never told from his point of view. So his actions are always witnessed and interpreted through the eyes of other people, such as Theon Greyjoy. So there are chapters in which the story is told from Theon's point of view. And Ramsay is mostly a background character in the novels. The novels rarely focus on him. He usually comes in and out of other people's story. In the TV show, Ramsay wasn't introduced in the second series, or the second season. He was introduced in the third season, and he's portrayed by a Welsh actor by the name of, I think it's Ewan Rayon. I don't know how to pronounce his name, but Ewan Rayon looks about right. I'm part Welsh, so there's that. And Rayon, if I'm pronouncing that right, had previously auditioned for the role of Jon Snow, which is interesting. He originally was auditioning for Jon Snow's character. He did not get that part, but Kit Harington did get the part of Jon Snow. And Ewan Rayon and Kit Harington are actually quite close friends, even though they've never been seen on screen together. So it's a little interesting to know that Jon Snow and Ramsay Snow are actually good friends, even though they're mortal enemies on the screen. Ewan said regarding when they've asked him recently, they're like, well, so do you think, Ramsay's going to die soon? And Ewan is like, yes, I would love it if this guy died a horrible death, because everyone dies in this show, and I'm sure Ramsay is no different from anyone. And he said, I've just bought a flat in London, so I hope that day doesn't come too soon, but that day is definitely coming, no mistake about it. And I hope when it does, it's epically nasty and preferably dragon-related. He needs to go out with a bang. God knows I don't want him to become a White Walker. So it's just interesting that he has no idea the future of the character, and he hopes that he goes out with a bang, and he doesn't want his character to become a White Walker. Although, if he did become a White Walker, then maybe his contract would be extended, so he would be able to afford that flat in London. Okay, let me talk a little bit about the public reaction to Ramsay. Some say that he's worse than Joffrey, and some say he's not as bad as Joffrey. And I don't know what to think about that. I personally think Ramsay is worse than Joffrey. I mean, Joffrey was terrible, don't get me wrong. But to me, Joffrey seemed more vulnerable and more insecure and acting out of a childishness. Joffrey, it might be surprising to some, in the books, Joffrey's only like 11 and 12 throughout the entire story that we see him. He becomes king like at 11 and dies at 12 or something. So he's really quite young. And although Joffrey did horrible things and seemed to take some pleasure in it, Ramsay he's a serial killer. He's a monster. But it's hard to compare these two guys and say who's worse. But I think if you just did a tally of the amount of suffering that people have endured at the hands of each of these people, I don't know. Maybe Joffrey made more people suffer because he was in more. He was in power for a long time. Anyway, I don't know. What do you guys think? Now, the other thing is reading online, there are plenty of people who really love him, who don't despise him. They actually seemingly identify with him, and that's interesting. I would suspect that it's because people identify with his power. He has a lot of power, and people fear him. And if you feel powerless and disrespected a lot, I think maybe it's tempting to want to identify with a character like this. I don't know. Maybe you have some inner sadist that you have yet to realize, or you need to suppress. I suppose Freud would say that we love characters like this because they get to do things that we want to do that we can't do because of social norms. There was an online poll that received 145,000 votes, and it was asking people to tell them who was who was the worst person on television. And Ramsay won the contest. He beat out Joffrey. He beat out Moriarty, who was in the what's it called? Oh, Sherlock Holmes show. Hannibal, the TV show about Hannibal. Pete from Mad Men, he beat out him. And he even beat out, from Parks and Rec, Jeremy Jam and Tammy. And that's saying something, because Jeremy Jam is terrible, but Tammy is awful from Parks and Rec. And so Ramsay even beat out Tammy. So that's saying something. God, I love that show. All right. But perhaps the biggest media reaction regarding Ramsay was toward the end of the last season. It was that scene with Sansa on their wedding night when Ramsay and Sansa get married. And you're just thinking, well, maybe Ramsay is going to be a nice guy, because there seemed to be some evidence that Ramsay was going to be nice to Sansa because he respected her or looked up to her or something. But of course, George Martin never lets us down in terms of letting us down. And he proceeded to write a scene in which Ramsay actually rapes his new bride. In the books, it's actually not even Sansa. He doesn't marry Sansa. He marries Jane, but he still rapes Jane that night. I think you pronounce it Jane. Anyway, I remember watching the scene at the end of last season, and this happens in Game of Thrones frequently, where I'm thinking or saying out loud, "Oh my God, do not let this happen in front of my eyes. Don't do this. I can see where you're heading, and don't do this. Don't do this." And then I'm going, "Oh my God, you're doing this to my brain. You're making me watch someone that I care about, Sansa, who's been through just horrible things just from the very beginning of the show. You're going to make me watch the most evil, vile character in the show rape one of the most innocent, nicest characters in the show. You're going to make me watch this, and this is awful." And God, it was intense. It was highly disturbing. And of course, in the land of Twitter, the Twitter times, there was a media backlash. Many people were outraged about the scene. For instance, Missouri Senator Claire McCaskill described the rape as gratuitous and disgusting. The producers of the show later said that these protests from people resulted in them making changes in the story for future episodes. So they're like, "Oh, well, we thought people wouldn't react this badly, so maybe we should scale this back a little bit for future episodes." The thing is season 6 is actually beyond the books. This is the first season that readers of the books will have no idea what's happening. The books and the TV show end at the exact same point. There's a number of actually interesting things in the books that they haven't shown yet that have already happened in the timeline of the TV show, and it's unsure if they ever will show it. There's one thing in particular, if you've read the books, where you're like, I wonder if they're ever going to show this major plot, side plot, because it's a pretty major side plot. But it's actually, and if you know the side plot, you know that it's kind of, it doesn't really fit well into the TV show. If they put it in the TV show, it's probably going to annoy the watchers, the audience, because it involves kind of a dubious magic premise. And so I don't know. We'll see what happens there. And it's not really needed it to move the main plot forward. But anyway. So let's see. Rayon, if I'm pronouncing that right, the guy who plays Ramsay, told the press, he said, after the rape scene, he said, I think if more people put their effort into charities that help women in the world today deal with the terror of rape, and less effort in social media about a fantasy show, then maybe things could change. I think that's actually quite a smart thing to say. I don't know if that goes over so well with people, but I think you're very right. Yeah, I mean, if people, generally speaking, put as much effort into actual advocacy to actually help human beings, rather than just ranting and raving with outrage on the internet, then yeah, the world would be a better place for sure. That isn't to say that we don't have a right or should not vocalize our opinions about these things, because that's important too. But if you're really upset about rape, for instance, and all you do about it is tweet, then you really should look at yourself in the mirror and say, what else could I be doing to actually reduce the rate of harm to other human beings in this world? And I don't know the answer to that, but maybe there's something you could actually do. Anyway, the actor also said to the press, "I think it could have been done in a much more brutal way. They didn't over-sexualize it or make it too gratuitous. They didn't trivialize it, and I thought it moved the characters forward." I think the actor who plays Ramsay is a smart fellow. I would agree with that. That it wasn't overly sexualized, for one. There are plenty of shows that would make it especially shows in this genre, HBO, Showtime shows where they will occasionally sprinkle in pornography, essentially. They could have made this more sensual, shall we say, and they did not do that. They also could have made it more gratuitous. And it to me, and I'm just one person, it didn't feel gratuitous or over the top. It affected me, and I didn't like the scene, but it was powerful. And maybe the director and the writers and Martin were trying to make us feel like Theon / Reek. Maybe they were, because Reek, I think, was there, wasn't he? Having to witness this, maybe he was making us do that. Plus, if you're really going to make us hate Ramsay, then this one really did that. Plus, these sorts of things happen now, and they particularly happened back then. If you're a history buff like I sort of am, rape of women was routine back then, and it was not pretty. And wives were raped too. I mean, it wasn't until recently that rape of women, of wives by husbands, it wasn't until recently that was even illegal, which is just insane. I mean, that law is essentially, it's like saying a husband can kill his wife if he wants to, which I suppose is probably still legal in some countries. Anyway, this is getting dark. Let's move let's move away from this. The actor also was asked how he felt about actually acting in this scene, and he said, "I was dreading it, and I couldn't sleep at night." So that shows that at least he has a conscience, which is a good thing for him and people around him. Okay, so I'm going to tell you kind of a detailed history of him in the books and in the TV show. So get ready for this, because I read the books, but it's been a while, and I don't think I realized how much detail we knew about Ramsay. To me, Ramsay was until recently in the books, he was a very distant character. And when people were asking me to do an episode on him, I was like, I don't think we have enough data to go on. But actually, when I started looking back into the story, there's actually a lot in there sprinkled in that we know about him. It's often mentioned by other people, and a lot of it isn't directly observed, so to speak, in the books. But anyway, okay. So Ramsay Bolton, also known as Ramsay Snow, also known as the Bastard of Bolton, also known as the Bastard of Dreadfort, which is the castle that the House Bolton rules. He's also referred to as the bastard son of Lord, he is the bastard son of Lord Roose Bolton. And he is currently in the storyline, the only son. Roose Bolton, his father, is Lord of the Dreadfort. And the Dreadfort is an old fortress in the north. If you're familiar with Westeros, the north is south of the wall, but north of all the other parts of the kingdom. And it's a wide expanse, think Scotland, I think is what it's modeled after. Okay, so let's look into his childhood. What was his childhood like? Well, before he was born, how he was conceived, let me just tell you this story because it's a nasty one. A nasty villain is conceived in a very nasty way. So Roose Bolton, the Lord of Dreadfort, Roose Bolton was hunting one time, and he saw a woman, and he decided he wanted to rape her. She was just working or something, and he saw her, and he's like, "Oh, I'm gonna rape her." And he decided that he was going to practice this banned tradition. There's an old tradition in Westeros where a lord or a king has the right to have sex with new brides. There used to be this old thing where new brides had to have sex with the lord or the king or the ruler of that area. New brides had to have sex with him, soon after getting married. and this is a thing, this is a thing in history. And it's just like, my God, can you imagine that? Can you imagine every new wife having to have sex with Barack Obama or something? I mean, that's what it's akin to. Or you're the mayor of your town. I mean, Jiminy Crickets, So this tradition gets banned because although Westeros is a terrible place to live, it's apparently not as bad as it was before. And Roose Bolton sees this woman and decides, you know what? I'm gonna bring back this tradition called the first night. It's called the first night. I'm gonna have sex with this woman because it's my right as lord of this land. Well, it turns out that she's married and her husband isn't too keen about this, so he hangs the man from a tree. He's a miller. He's a miller, and I think they mill corn and this kind of stuff. But he hangs the man from a tree because he accuses him of not informing him as lord of the land of the new marriage. And he says, "You should have told me about this." And the man's probably saying, "But this is a rule that I thought was long ago banned. I didn't know I was supposed to tell you." And he says, "Well, too bad. I'm really interested in raping your wife, and you're standing in the way, so I'm going to hang you from the tree." Hangs him from this tree. And then he proceeds to rape the woman under the tree that the husband is hanging from. So trigger alert, post trigger alert. This episode is going to, as I've told already, the rape of Sansa and now the rape of this woman. There are going to be graphic depictions, and I don't know if they're graphic, but you know what I'm saying. So if it's difficult to hear this stuff, by all means, do not listen. Okay. So he rapes her while the husband is swinging from the tree above. And then he leaves, and he's saying to people, he's saying, "You know what? That was not as pleasurable as I thought it was going to be. I'm actually quite disappointed that it didn't feel as good as physically. It wasn't as good as I thought it was going to be." So I don't know what to think about that, but a year later, the woman arrives at Dreadfort and talks to Roose and says, "This is your baby." and I've named him Ramsay, and he's your son. Roos is, I think, married at the time, and he says, okay, why don't you come in here? And then he is about to kill her and the baby, but then he saw that the baby Ramsay, had his eyes, and he decided not to kill them because it was taboo to kill your own children or your own family members at the time. So he decides not to do that. Ramsay's mother told Roos that her husband's brother, her dead husband's brother, stole the mill from her and made her homeless. And so Roos was worried that his liege lord, Rickard Stark, Eddard's father, you remember that the warden of the north or whatever, Rickard Stark, Eddard's father. Roos at this is he's a bannerman of the Stark family, and so he's worried that Rickard Stark is going to find out that he raped a woman and killed her husband. So but at the same time, he doesn't want to kill his bastard son and this woman, so he tries to clean up the situation by going to the dead husband's brother who took the mill, and he cuts out his tongue so that he can't tell anyone about what happened to his own brother, the miller man who was hung from the tree. Cuts out the tongue of the dude and says, give the mill back to this woman. And then he gives the woman, Roos gives Ramsay's mother the mill and gives her a pig and several chicken chicks, and a bag of stars every year on the condition that she not tell anyone, even Ramsay, what happened. So again, Roos is worried that he's going to get in trouble with Rickard Stark and pays off the woman essentially and says, don't tell anyone, including this baby, that, what happened. Later, when Ramsay was older, he convinced himself that Roose Bolton fell in love with his mother at first sight, and Ramsay likes to think of their union as being very, very romantic. So this is like 20 years later when Ramsay knows about the whole situation between his mother and father, his biological parents, and instead of believing the stories of this rape and the killing of this man, he makes up this story that it's very poetic and romantic, because that's just how Ramsay is. Okay. So Ramsay was then raised in poverty as a child, as a bastard, as the bastard son of a poor miller's widow. So this woman is a widow, and she is poor, very poor, and she's raising this son. Around this time, Roose fought for Eddard Stark in the civil war against House Targaryen, known as Robert's Rebellion, and Roose proved his worth as a soldier in the Battle of the Trident. So just if you're familiar with the whole backstory to the Game of Thrones, Roose actually fought for Eddard Stark, and the usurpers, Robert Baratheon's rebellion, in which Robert became king. So he was on the good side of that situation. And since Ramsay was raised by a poor widow, he knows nothing about courtly behavior. So that'll come into play later. So there's a whole culture among the gentry people and the rich and the landowners, and Ramsay was raised in a different situation and therefore doesn't understand how to conduct himself. And incidentally, in the books, he comes across as being crass and blunt, and he swears a lot and he taunts people. He's not seen in the books as a refined person. He comes across as a lower class person, essentially. Okay, so Ramsay reportedly liked his mother and speaks highly of her, so maybe she was an okay mother for him, unsure. Okay, so Ramsay grows up as a poor bastard kid with a single mother, and he's 12 years old, and she decides that the mother, because Ramsay is so difficult, so Ramsay is a very difficult child, and the mother decides to go back to Roose Bolton, even though she is worried that Roose might kill her, like he almost did last time. And the Ramsay's mother tells Roose Bolton, says that she needs help in raising Ramsay because of how difficult he is. And Roose doesn't know what to do, so he wants to get rid of her, essentially. And he offers the woman a servant. He says, well, how about I give you a servant? Would that help out? And the woman says, oh yeah, it'd be great. I'm too poor to afford a servant, so sure, give me a servant. Well, Roose gives this woman the worst servant of all time, and his name is Heek. I think you pronounce it Heek. But everyone has called him Reek because he reeks. He smells really bad, and he has some sort of birth condition in which his skin smells terrible. There were even rumors that his blood smelled terrible or something. So due to some birth defect, this boy named Heek smelled terribly, and everyone called him Reek. And he bathed 3 times a day, and he wore flowers in his hair, trying to mask how bad he smelled, but he still smelled terrible. So Roose was being a dick by giving her this stinky servant to try to get rid of her. She's like, I'm having a hard time raising your bastard son. He's a very difficult child. Well, how about this smelly servant? Will that get you off my back? So Reek goes and serves this woman and Ramsay. We never find, I keep referring to Ramsay's mother as this woman because they don't mention her name. Well, Ramsay and Reek become very close friends, so to speak. Or they become very close. They do a lot of things together. And Ramsay starts ordering Reek around. And there are hints that Ramsay was very cruel to Reek. So Ramsay is 12, 13, 14, and he has this new servant to order around, and Ramsay is being a total dick. And what I'm imagining is that the mother is like happy that Ramsay is just out of the house and has a companion to boss around, and she doesn't have to deal with him anymore. So some of you might be saying, wait a second, I thought Theon was Reek. Well, I'll get to that. Okay. So eventually, the mother is fed up. She can't deal with Ramsay. He's such a difficult child that she defies Roose's, request or demand to not tell anyone about Ramsay's identity. And the mother tells Ramsay that Roose is his father, that he's a bastard son of the Lord of this land. Basically, she wants Ramsay to get out of the house. She's like, let me tell you something, son. Since you're a total handful and I can't stand you, you know what? You know who your real father is? You've always wanted to know. Well, it's Lord Roose Bolton. So how about you go to him and let him deal with you? I have to tell you that this story is so contemporary and modern. There are the bastard stuff is, but I've been with many families in this situation where single mothers will, when a child is in their young teens, they will get fed up and, they love their son and their daughter, but they don't know what else to do. And they'll send them off to the biological parent that is absent and say, look, you deal with it. It's a very common story. So anyway, this worked for the mom because Ramsay was like, what? Hello. Let's go to Roose and let's see how I can parlay this into something good for me. And so Ramsay goes to Roose, and somehow Roose lets him into his home and takes him under his wing as his bastard son. And Reek comes with Ramsay. Okay. Now, Roose Bolton, at this point, has a true-born son, a non-bastard son, Domeric, who was older than Ramsay. So at this point, Ramsay's like, okay, I'm a bastard son, which sucks. And double sucks is there's this older son who's not a bastard and will is the heir to Roose Bolton. So when Roose Bolton dies, Domeric is going to get the kingdom or this land, and I'm just going to be the bastard son of Roose, and I'll always be considered to be not honorable or not important, or I won't have power. Well, what did Ramsay do? You could just take a guess. I'm unsure if this is exactly explicitly described or told in the book, but it's at least hinted at, if not just explicitly told, that Ramsay murders Domeric, his older half brother, with poison. So that makes Ramsay, even though he's a bastard son, makes him potentially a logical choice as the successor for Roose Bolton. Okay, so let's get into another thing that's referred to about. This is all prior to the first book, so this is all stuff that they talk about that in the timeline of the story happened prior to A Game of Thrones. Okay, one of Ramsay's hobbies as a teenager is to have young women stripped naked and released into a forest, into the Bolton forest. He then hunts them with a pack of female feral dogs that are trained to hunt human beings. If the women don't run and make it a fun hunt for him, he punishes the women by raping them and then flaying them alive. So, again, post-trigger alert. If they don't make a good hunt for him, he punishes them by raping them and then flaying them alive, meaning he ties them to essentially to like a cross, like a Christian cross, but it's more like an X. He ties them to an X, and he proceeds to cut off their skin while they are living. It's very painful, from what I understand. Then he eventually kills them, and then he feeds the bodies to his dogs. But if they run and make a good hunt for him, he's happy with that. So if he takes these women and releases them into the Bolton forest and say, you better run because I want a good sport. Well, he still rapes them once they're caught, because they're always caught, but he doesn't flay them alive. He just kills them quickly, and then he flays their dead bodies. And then he honors these good runners by naming new dogs after these women. And he makes trophies out of their skins. And it's indicated later that in all likelihood, Reek, his childhood companion and / servant, then proceeds to rape the dead bodies. So if you weren't disgusted enough with Ramsay and Reek, I'm sure that pushed you over the top. Reek likes to have sex with dead women's bodies after Ramsay has raped them. Jiminy crickets. It's all fictional, Kirk. It didn't really happen. It's happened in real life, but this is just fictional. It's just fantasy. Okay. So Reek, just so we know and understand, he was just as cruel as Ramsay. Again, he seemed to practice necrophilia. He, just a little bit more of his background prior to the Game of Thrones begin. It's told that he once doused himself in perfumes that he stole from Roose's wife to try to rid himself of his terrible smell. But he was caught and whipped for his crime. A year later, he stole perfume again from Roos's wife, but this time he drank it as a way of trying to make himself infused with good smells, and he almost died. So there's that. He's not a smart fellow. He's a smelly, dumb fellow. Also, it's told that no one in the Dreadfort could stand to be near him because he smelled so bad, not even the horses. So he slept in a sty with the pigs, which probably didn't help his smell all too well, but that's where he slept. He slept with the pigs. Okay, so that's Reek. A little bit more about Ramsay in his childhood. He had some buddies once he became known as, Roos's bastard son. He had some buddies, and he called them the Bastards Boys. The Bastards Boys. It sounds like a rap group from the 80s. We're the Bastard Boys, and we're here to say we like to flay. Hey, hey, hey. Oh, boy. Also, Roos makes the Bastard Boys spy on Ramsay on Roos's behalf. So there's treachery all around in the Roos household. Also, just a little side note, that all of this history, all this childhood, is in contrast to Jon Snow, who is the bastard of Winterfell. Jon Snow was raised by his biological father, Eddard Stark. So we have two bastard boys in the north. One is treated with respect and one is treated not with respect. And we see two very different personalities when they become adults. So the moral of the story is, if you have a bastard son, do not do what Roos did and instead do what Eddard did. Okay. Now, Ramsay, as I said earlier in the books, was not introduced until A Clash of Kings, which is the second book. Ramsay is a young man at this point. It's unclear how old he is. Some say he is the same age as Theon, and Theon, I think, is around 19 or 20. And so he's probably he's in that range. And in the the old medieval world, the Westeros world, that's an older man, you understand? Because, again, as I said earlier, Joffrey Baratheon was 11 or 12 at the time of him being king. Robb Stark was, I think, 14 or 15. So he was King Robb Stark and kicking ass as a king in the north. And he was, I think, the oldest. He was 16 or something like that. Sansa is, I think, 13, 14. She's the younger sister of Robb Stark. So Ramsay being 20-ish means he's quite a bit older than a lot of our main characters. So it's just something to take note of. He's a fully developed adult male, whereas many of the other characters are still children for the most part. Okay. So in A Clash of Kings, second book, we start off with Roose Bolton is still basically on the good side of the line. He's one of Robb Stark's bannermen, and Roose Bolton is at war. I mean, if you remember the TV show, you remember Roose Bolton was actually a good guy in the beginning. And they're marching south to fight House Lannister, following the execution of Eddard Stark by Joffrey Baratheon. And the word for it is that House Bolton is a vassal family of House Stark. If you're into that sort of nerd history talk, a vassal family. Or in the George Martin language, he's a bannerman. So, because Roose Bolton is at war and away from Dreadfort, Ramsay becomes the Castellan of Dreadfort. So he basically becomes the de facto ruler of House Bolton's castle and lands. Okay, so his father, Roose Bolton, is, like I said, in southern Westeros, fighting in Robb Stark's army during the War of the Five Kings. You're probably familiar with that time. Let's see if I can identify the five kings. You had Joffrey, you had Stannis, you had Robb Stark, you had Renly Baratheon, and the fifth king is Balon Greyjoy. So those are the five kings who are fighting in the War of Five Kings. When Ramsay receives the news that the neighboring lands of House Hornwood, they have lost both the Lord and the Lord's heir, Ramsay attacks House Hornwood, taking Hornwood Keep and forcing the widowed Lady Hornwood to marry him so that Ramsay can have her lands, which is wonderful of him to do. And instead of just being content with, okay, I just did a terrible thing and I'm probably going to be punished for this at some point. Because that's the whole thing. Like, this shows how impulsive and how stupid Ramsay is. Now, in the end, he sort of, by dumb luck, ends up being okay. Or you could just say because of how ruthless he is, he's okay. But if things would have gone a certain way, what would have happened was, if Robb Stark had not been betrayed by the Freys, and it looked like Robb Stark was going to win this whole thing, and Robb Stark became king of all Westeros, then at some point, House Hornwood would have said, so while the War of Five Kings was going on, we lost our lord and the heir to House Hornwood, and suddenly the Southern Northman, Ramsay, comes in and just takes over, and that doesn't seem very fair, does it? And King Robb probably would have said, yeah, that's a pretty much of a dick move. Let me punish Ramsay for you, and blah blah blah. So now I'm not sure if that's exactly what the context was, but anyway, so Ramsay does that, and now he has both House Bolton and now he has House Hornwood, and he decides not to lay low, but he decides to rape Lady Hornwood, as his new wife, his first wife, and he forces her to sign a document proclaiming him the Lord of Hornwood. He then locks her in a tower without any food. And in typical fashion, where you just think, okay, well, that's probably enough to do to somebody. I mean, he takes her land, he rapes her, he locks her in a tower, he doesn't give her any food, he makes her turn over all her lands and castle to him. Isn't that enough, Ramsay? Isn't that enough? Haven't you done enough, Ramsay? He's Ramsay Snow at this point. Well, he then flays the skin off of her fingers. He flays the skin off of her fingers, and she is forced to chew off her fingers to end the pain. Because when you flay skin off, it's apparently very painful because you have all these raw nerves just exposed to the elements. And so she's sitting there in the tower, and she's like, well, there's only one way to get rid of this pain, and I have to chop my fingers off. Well, I don't have any knife around. Well, I've got sharp teeth, so here goes. And then as she's starving, she starts to become delirious and desperate, and she actually consumes these fingers. She eats and consumes her fingers for sustenance. So that's great. And then to top it off, she dies from starvation. She is mercifully put out of her misery, but not after unnecessarily suffering for a long time. Okay. Ramsay then continues his raping and murdering because now he's in charge. He's in charge of House Bolton lands. He's in charge of House Hornwood lands. And he roams the countryside, raping and murdering, particularly young women, because he can, because he's terrible. Sir Roderick Cassel, the master of arms at Winterfell, because, at this point, Robb Stark and all the army and all the bannermen are down south fighting, Roderick Cassel was left behind at Winterfell, and he's sort of kind of in charge of the law to some extent. So he leaves Winterfell because he hears about Ramsay and all of his terribleness. Sir Roderick leaves Winterfell to find Ramsay to put an end to his crimes. So again, even before Robb Stark wins the war, there are people interested in law, and Sir Roderick is very capable. So Roderick's party comes across Ramsay shortly after he has raped and killed yet another peasant girl. As Roderick is arriving to the scene, Reek, the Reek/Reek person, is raping the dead body. As I said, he's into that sort of thing. Shame on you, Reek, but you'll get your comeuppance in about 5 minutes. So when Ramsay spots Sir Roderick approaching, he's like, holy crap, that's it. My time has come. It's over for me. But he says, wait, I'm a smart, cunning fellow. I'm gonna figure out a way out of this. So he realizes that there's only one way out, and he decides to disguise himself. So he pulls Reek off the dead body, and he says, Reek, we have to switch clothing. So they switch clothing, and on Reek he puts all of his sigils and whatnot to mark Reek as the leader, as the Lord. And he tells Reek, he gives him their one horse, and he tells them, because the other horse got lamed because the woman actually ran far and was a good runner, and one of the horses was lamed. But anyway, so they only have one horse, and Ramsay tells Reek to put on these clothes as a lord and act like a lord and ride for Dreadfort, because Ramsay knows that Roderick is going to catch Reek, because he knows that that's just going to happen. So Reek has learned over the years that you must obey. You must obey Ramsay or else. So Reek totally obeys Ramsay and puts on his clothes and acts like the Lord and gets on the one good horse and rides for the Dreadfort. As Ramsay expected, Sir Roderick's men chase down Reek and they kill him. They think that he's Ramsay. And they say, okay, yay. No more Ramsay. Ramsay's done. No more of this terribleness. We've done a good deed today. But they've only done sort of a 10% good deed because, Reek was no altar boy himself. So they got rid of that. But Ramsay's still quite alive because he's pretending he's Reek. Also, to really drive home the disguise, and this is again George R.R. Martin and his wonderful. I don't know what this. It's sort of accurate storytelling, but just it's so terrible. Anyway, the girl in her fear or in her death had soiled herself. Let's just say. They indicated before she died. So in her fear, she soiled herself. So just put that into the scene here. And while Reek is running from Sir Roderick and his men, Ramsay takes this dead woman's poo and smears it all over himself to really drive home the disguise that he is Reek and not, in fact, Ramsay. I mean, these are the details in these books that you just don't get in the TV. They always say the books are better than the TV show. Well, in this instance, is it better? Well, I mean, it is. Not this detail, but They're actually really well written. I like the style. Every scene. In fact, just as a side note, the character on the TV show that really exemplifies George R. R. Martin's writing style is Tyrion. Whenever Tyrion is on screen, you always know there's going to be some snappy dialogue, and it's going to have every scene has sort of an interesting arc to it that holds your attention. Well, that's the way all the books are, particularly the first and second book. You're really, the way it's written, it's very compelling. There's always these little quips that happen and funny little things that are said. But there's also terribleness, like Ramsay wiping a dead girl's poo all over himself after she was chased down and raped, and blah, blah, blah. Anyway. So when Roderick's men come back after killing Reek, whom they think is Ramsay, they come back to Ramsay, who's disguised as Reek, and they take him as a prisoner to Winterfell. I think they debate. They're like, should we kill this Reek character? No, let's bring him back. Because Roderick wants to keep him alive because they want to keep him as a witness for Ramsay's crimes, hoping that after Roose Bolton hears Reek's tale, Roose would abandon his claim of the Hornwood lands. So, because to Roose, he's sitting there thinking, oh, a raven has arrived, and wouldn't you know it, my bastard son has married the widow of a local house, and I just doubled my lands. That's good for you, Ramsay. Well, Roderick at this point thinks that Roose is a good person, and Roderick is like, well, I'm going to keep this Reek around because I'm going to keep him as a witness for what Ramsay did, and I'm going to convince Roose, look, you've got to give House Hornwood back to someone else because this whole thing was a terrible travesty and atrocity, and the Boltons don't deserve the Hornwood lands at this point. And so Roderick does not kill Reek. This is a tragedy decision, tragic decision, because wouldn't it have been nice if Roderick had just said, fuck it, let's just kill this Reek, and then all of us wouldn't have to deal with Ramsay. But alas, that did not happen. Okay. Then Theon Greyjoy takes Winterfell. And this is where Theon enters the Ramsay story. Okay, I won't tell you the whole Theon Greyjoy story, but, Theon's a piece of work himself. He's no Joffrey Baratheon or Ramsay Snow, but, he's another character that everyone hates, particularly in the beginning. Now people have kind of come around because he's been victimized so much, but I'll get to that. So when Theon Greyjoy takes Winterfell, remember that Ramsay, disguised as Reek, is a prisoner in Winterfell. So when Theon Greyjoy and the Ironborn find Ramsay in the dungeons, they figure he's Reek because they don't know what Reek or Ramsay looks like because they don't have Facebook back then. So they go, okay, well, we got this Reek character. And Reek convinces Theon to keep him alive and let him serve Theon. Reek is like, let me serve you. So Reek/Ramsay becomes a servant to Theon. And he quickly becomes one of Theon's most trusted attendants. He helps Theon hunt the escaped Bran and Rickon Stark. He helps cover up the fact that the Stark boys escaped by killing two peasant boys who were of similar age to the Stark boys, and then Theon flayed the corpses to avoid recognition. So I don't know if you remember that part, but Theon wants to, capture Bran and Rickon so that they don't come back and exact revenge. And Reek/Ramsay captures two boys that are similar, and then they proceed to disfigure the bodies, and then they claim that they caught them, so that because Theon just wanted to show off and felt humiliated that he didn't actually capture the two boys. Anyway, Theon then approves of Ramsay killing 3 of Theon's men who knew the truth about the fake boys. So Ramsay's like, let me kill 3 of your men that know, and then it'll only be the 2 of us that know that you never actually caught Bran and Rickon. And Theon's like, oh yeah, go ahead, kill those guys. That sounds like a good idea. Theon then uses the Winterfell Kennel Master as a scapegoat and has him executed for the murders of Theon's men. So murder is just, any problem for Theon and Ramsay can be solved by a good murder. Theon then contemplates killing Reek/Ramsay, and it would have been nice if Theon would have done it, just like it would have been nice if Roderick would have done it. But alas, Theon fears that the Reek/Ramsay character has a hidden written account of everything that happened. And so he doesn't kill him just yet. Another tragic turn of events there. Then, when the Northerners attack Winterfell to take it back from Theon and the Ironborn, the Reek/Ramsay guy sneaks off to the Dreadfort to gather reinforcements for Theon. So Reek/Ramsay sneaks off to the Dreadfort and says, I'm going to come back with reinforcements. And Theon's like, I'm a little skeptical, but I need all the help I can get. So Ramsay gets himself cleaned up, and he puts on armor to hide his identity. He has a helm. He puts on a helm that makes it impossible to see his face. And he gets all he gathers up an army from around House Bolton and House Hornwood. And Sir Roderick Cassel figures that the Bolton army has arrived to help them take back Winterfell from Theon and the Ironborn. So again, just so you understand here, so Roderick is actually outside the winter. So okay, in case maybe you're following, but in case you're not. So Winterfell was the Stark family castle. Robb Stark leaves with all the men, and then it leaves it in Roderick Cassel's hands. And then Theon Greyjoy suddenly appears with the Ironborn and capitalizes on the fact that most of the armies are in the south fighting in the War of Five Kings, and Theon Greyjoy takes Winterfell. Well, Roderick is outside of the castle at this point and starts gathering other northern men, because they all stick together in the north, to take back Winterfell. And so when the Bolton army arrives, they think, oh, it's just another group of Northmen arrived to help us take Winterfell back. But when Roderick offers Ramsay his hand in friendship, he doesn't even know who this man is. He's like, oh, well, I see the banner of Roose Bolton. I don't know who this general is or whatever, but I'm going to go up to him, shake his hand. Ramsay slices Roderick's arm off and then proceeds to surprise all the Northmen who are there and slaughters them. So Ramsay kills Sir Roderick, and he routs the Northman army and lifts the siege that was happening on Winterfell. And Theon's like, yay! Who is this army that arrived and helped me so much? Because again, he thinks Reek was Reek. He doesn't realize it was actually Ramsay, so Ramsay gets cleaned up. Anyway, so then Ramsay is let into Winterfell because Theon's like, yay, let these guys in. They freed us from the attackers. And Ramsay then proceeds to kill all the Ironborn, kills all Theon's men. And he decides to burn Winterfell, which is nice. And he takes Theon prisoner. Poor Theon. And Ramsay makes, then he, captures a lot of the women of Winterfell. And what does he do? He does what he always does, which is he turns all of those women into hunted prey, in which his women, or his female feral dogs that are all named after women he's killed before, they hunt these girls, and then he proceeds to rape them and flay them. Okay, so that's all in the second book. Now, how about the third book, A Storm of Swords, which was published in 2000, 16 years ago. Jiminy Crickets, a long time ago. I don't think I've said Jiminy Crickets as often I have said today. Okay, in this book, Ramsay keeps Theon at the Dreadfort, where he flays him, right? So this is where the books and the TV show diverge in terms of the details here. Because in the books, they don't describe all the torturing of Theon. They don't depict it. They just show the end result of everything. So I'll get to the TV show in a second. But in the books, Ramsay, it's just sort of alluded to that Theon is a prisoner at the Dreadfort. And Ramsay sends a small piece of Theon's skin to Robb Stark. So Robb Stark's still alive at this point. Ramsay sends a small piece of Theon's skin to King Robb Stark as a gift to show that vengeance is being exacted for the murder of Bran and Rickon Stark. So remember that King Robb Stark at this point has heard that Bran and Rickon are dead, and that Theon is the one who killed them. And Ramsay is trying to gain favor at this point for King Robb by saying, "I've caught your Theon, the person that you hate, and look what I'm doing. I'm flaying his skin. I'm torturing him. So aren't we friends?" But then this is presumably because Ramsay doesn't even know this is in the works. Ramsay's father, Lord Roose Bolton, murders Robb at the Red Wedding. The Red Wedding. The terrible Red Wedding. Then House Bolton is rewarded by King, is it Joffrey or Tommen? One of the two. By the Lannister, people. House Bolton is rewarded by Roose being named Warden of the North, just as Eddard Stark was. So Roose Bolton is now Warden of the North, and Ramsay then becomes betrothed to a girl posing as Arya Stark. Her name is Jane Poole. So in the TV show, this is Sansa Stark, but in the book, it's sort of a weird storyline, actually, when you think about it, but perhaps more accurate to history, but like things like this actually happening. But I actually like that in the TV show they did something different, because to bring Sansa back to Winterfell felt more fitting, I guess. But anyway, so in the books, it might be surprising that so Roose is thinking, okay, I just took over as Warden of the North. I just betrayed King Robb Stark. All the Northerners hate me at this point. I'm a terrible person to all of them, and I just sided with the enemy, and I betrayed their king. Well, the king in the South has named me Warden of the North, but that doesn't mean that everyone's going to follow me. Someone could rise up and decide to off me. Well, what's one way I can try to calm things down so that people will accept the fact that I'm in charge? Well, what if my son marries one of the Starks? Well, that will mean that Winterfell will stay in the Stark family, essentially, because when I'm dead, Ramsay will be Warden of the North, and his wife will be a Stark, and so therefore everything's cool. Well, they can't find any of the Starks because they've either killed them or they're on the run. So at this point, Arya and Sansa are on the run. Littlefinger has Sansa, and Arya at this point I don't know where she is. Maybe she's with the Hound. I'm not sure. But anyway, they find this girl, Jane Poole, and they just announce that she's Arya Stark instead, and say, well, this is Arya, everyone, and she's now going to marry Ramsay, and this will legitimize the Roose Stark union, and I can be Warden of the North, blah, blah, blah. Also, King Tommen, so it was Tommen at the time. So King Tommen Baratheon, this is after the death of Joffrey Baratheon. King Tommen Baratheon makes Ramsay Bolton a Bolton instead of Ramsay Snow. So in order for a bastard to become a lord or an heir to the lordship, I think a king is the only person who can really announce that. So he makes that so because he wants to reward Roose Bolton for his treachery in the Red Wedding. So at this point in the third book, Ramsay has finally arrived. He's finally an official heir to the Bolton house, and his father is Warden of the North, which is kind of like a mini king. As they say, the North is just as big as all the 6 kingdoms in the South combined. So it's more desolate, but it's a big deal. And so now Ramsay is basically prince of an entire country. He went from being a poor bastard boy with a stinky friend to being the heir to the Lord of Winterfell, which is a big deal for him. Okay, the fourth book, A Feast for Crows, 2005. This takes place at the same time as the third book, if I remember right. So there's not really anything to tell other than it just kind of obliquely refers to a lot of things that happen in the third book. Okay, fifth book. And just incidentally, I'll get through this and then I'll analyze his personality. I just think his story is just so interesting. I just really want to tell the whole thing. The fifth book, A Dance with Dragons, published in 2011. So it's 6 years in between each book. Ramsay tortures Theon in this book. He makes him take on the identity of Reek. So this is the third Reek. First we had the Heek Reek, then we had the Ramsay Reek, and now we have the Theon Reek. He never allows Theon to bathe, and he covers Theon in shit. Ramsay also removes the skin on several of Theon's toes and fingers, leaving him in agony for days before cutting off the fingers and toes. Ramsay removes several of Theon's teeth because he hated Theon's smile. George Martin also implies in the books that Ramsay cut off Theon's penis, but it's not exactly referred to in the TV show. They definitely say that he cut off his penis. It should be indicated here that there's no known reason why Ramsay keeps Theon alive, but only for his own sadistic pleasure. I mean, there are other possible reasons, like maybe Theon or maybe Ramsay missed his old friend Reek, because Reek, he basically set up Reek to be killed. So maybe he wants to have his old friend back and sort of created essentially his old friend. Maybe he feels guilty for killing the first Reek. Probably not, but maybe. There's also theories. It's like, well, maybe he kept Theon alive so he could bargain with the Ironborn, with Balon Greyjoy, but he doesn't seem to really do it. He doesn't. In the books, he doesn't seem to use Theon as a bargaining chip. So it just seems like Theon is just kept alive for Ramsay's shits and giggles. All right, so in Book 5, Ramsay gathers an army to march south to attack the Ironborn-occupied Moat Cailin from the rear. So Ramsay makes Reek/Theon, go to the Ironborn. This is in the TV show too. He makes Theon go to the Ironborn in Moat Cailin. So the Ironborn are Theon's people. He makes Theon go to Moat Cailin to convince the Ironborn to surrender in exchange for their lives. So Theon goes in to the besieged Moat Cailin and says, look, if you hand over Moat Cailin to Ramsay Bolton, I personally promise, as one of your kin, that you will be able to live. And you're going to die if you stay because you don't have any more food, and eventually, Ramsay's going to win. And so let's just make it easy on everybody. We'll let you go, and we'll let you go free. And this convinces the Ironborn. They're like, well, Theon's one of us, and he makes a good deal, and it's right. We're all doomed. And so, okay. So now at this point, it's unclear if Ramsay was actually going to be able to take Moat Cailin because the Ironborn are fierce warriors. But after Theon/Reek convinces the Ironborn to give up, Ramsay actually absolutely wins Moat Cailin. And of course, Ramsay being Ramsay just does Ramsay all day long, and he decides to renege on his promise, and he has them all flayed alive. At some point, you'd think he'd just get bored of flaying people, but he doesn't. So he flays all the Ironborn alive, even though he had promised to let them go free. Now, it should be mentioned here that Roose doesn't really like Ramsay's behavior. He's getting tired of Ramsay doing his Ramsay thing. And he tells Ramsay that he needs to be more discreet because he's becoming famous for his sadism, which isn't good for House Bolton. If you're going to lead, you have to be softer than that. You can't do those things or else people aren't going to follow you. So again, it's not as if Roose is saying, don't do these things because they're wrong. He's only saying, don't do these things because they don't really serve us in the end. Okay, so now Ramsay gets married to the person who is impersonating Arya Stark, Jane Poole. And at this point, only Ramsay, Roose, and Theon/Reek know that the girl is not Arya Stark. So Ramsay and his father and Theon are the only ones who know that it's not actually Arya Stark. Everyone else thinks that it is Arya Stark. Because remember that Theon and Ramsay have killed most of the people who would even know what Arya Stark looked like. And Ramsay repeatedly abuses and rapes this Jane Poole, who was acting like Arya Stark, repeatedly abuses and rapes her while Theon watches. This is in the book. Now, it should be noted that in all likelihood, Jane Poole was quite young, because if she was going to look like Arya Stark, she would have to be of similar age. And I think Arya at this point is like 9 or 10. And so Jane Poole would have been around that age, is my guess. And so just picture that in your mind, another terrible thing. And then Jane and Theon are rescued and freed by Mance Rayder. So this is where the books and the TV show starts to go quite different. So you remember who Mance Rayder is, right? Well, Mance Rayder goes to Winterfell and rescues and frees Jane Poole and Theon. Remember, Jane is, everyone thinks that she's Arya, and Theon is Reek. And Mance Rayder actually was sent by Jon Snow at the Wall at Castle Black because Jon Snow had heard that Arya Stark was being married forcibly to Ramsay. And so when Jon Snow hears about that, he's like, Mance, you got to do this solid for me. You got to go back to my old home, Winterfell, and you got to free my sister because we all thought that she was dead. Because at this point, no one knows, prior to Arya Stark suddenly showing up as Jane Poole, it was unknown if Arya Stark was even alive because they wondered if she got killed when the fall of the Starks happened, early on. Okay. So Jon Snow sends Mance Rayder. Mance Rayder shows up and frees Arya, but doesn't realize it's not Arya, it's Jane Poole, and frees Theon just because I think they were, paired up at the time as fellow, slave whipping boys of Ramsay. Jane and Theon could relate to each other. Jon Snow later receives a letter from Ramsay claiming that he had captured Mance and killed Stannis Baratheon, who was riding to besiege Winterfell, had left Castle Black to take Winterfell. So Jon Snow's like, okay, Mance, you got to go save my sister. And then he receives a letter saying that Ramsay had captured Mance and killed Stannis. So this is the end of the book and the end of season 5 last year. You'll remember that after Jon Snow reads Ramsay's letter, Jon decides to head to Winterfell with the Night's Watch to kill Ramsay. But Jon Snow is stabbed by the Night's Watch before he can leave Castle Black. And in the book, not the TV show, George Martin does not reveal how much of this letter is true from Ramsay. So we don't know if any of this has happened. So again, in the books, Jon Snow just receives this letter that Mance has been captured and that Stannis is dead. But we don't actually know if that's happened. And we don't actually even know if the letter was written by Ramsay because it didn't have a flayed skin on it. Whenever Ramsay would send a letter, he would put some flayed skin on it as a calling card that this is indeed from him. And this letter didn't have that. So now in the TV show, they show all this happening essentially. So maybe it really did happen. But in the books, it's a lot less clear and it's a total cliffhanger. And even in the books, it's basically a cliffhanger. All right, so that's a history. Now, let's get a description of him because the description of him in the books is actually quite different than the depiction on the TV show. There's a lot of differences in the way that George Martin describes people and the way that they're depicted in the show. I feel like the show is trying to appeal to modern sensibilities instead of actually trying to provide what would have been typical of the historical time that it's trying to portray. There's a lot of things that happened in the medieval times that would look quite silly to our eyes in 2016, and so I think probably smartly so, the producers decided to not necessarily go with all of George R. R. Martin's descriptions, but anyway. So Ramsay Bolton in the books is described as being very ugly. Now, the character who plays Ramsay is not ugly. In fact, a lot of people are ugly in the Game of Thrones books, and in the TV show, they're very rarely ugly as I think they are in the books, like Brienne of Tarth. In the books, you get a sense that she is heinously ugly, but in the TV show, she's actually played by a very attractive woman. Now she's tall, and they make her look very not very ladylike, but she's not ugly the way that ugly people can be. I mean, the picture I had in my mind of Brienne from reading the books was just terrible, and same with Ramsay. Ramsay is described as being extremely ugly and has pink and blotchy skin. So just imagine that. And he has long, dark, dry hair. So long, dark, split ends hair. He's described as being big boned and slope shouldered. And he's described as having a fleshiness to him, indicating that he will be fat when he's older. I like that description. A fleshiness about him, predicting he'll be fat when he's older. His nose is broad and his mouth is small. His lips are wide and meaty and wormy looking. You just have to read these books because the way he describes, he's saying his lips are wide and meaty and they look like worms. And he has a wet-lipped smile. A wet-lipped smile. It's so gross. His eyes are small, close-set, and oddly pale, like two chips of dirty ice. Like two chips of dirty ice. Small and close-set. Ramsay sometimes wears a garnet cut in the shape of a drop of blood in his right ear. So that's kind of creepy. In battle, Ramsay wears dark armor with a red helm and a pale pink cloak. So this is his way of making his armor look like he has the face and shoulders of a skinless and bloody man whose mouth is open in a silent scream. So again, he has regular color armor, and then the top of his shoulders it's pink as if he's being flayed, and then his head is red because it's perhaps more flayed, and then the front of his helm looks like he's screaming. So just imagine if they had done that in the TV show. I think a lot of people would have been like, what? But that's what they describe. And some things really are just better left in books, because when you read that, you just think, oh my God, that sounds terrible. But if you actually depicted it on the screen, it would look sort of silly. Ramsay's weapons included the falchion, a dagger, and a flaying knife, of course, and all with hilts of yellow bone. So again, he's supposed to be ugly, pink and blotchy skin, long, dark, dry hair, big boned. His broad nose, small mouth. His lips are wide and meaty, and he has a wet lip smile, and his eyes are small, close set, and oddly pale. So he's not a pleasant looking guy. Now, the actor is a good looking young man. So, piece all that together. All right, now let's get into his character. What is his personality like? What's he like? Well, he's vicious. He's unpredictable. He's fearless. He's very cunning. He's an effective manipulator. He's very cruel. Has no remorse. He's described as savage and wild. He takes delight in torturing other people. He is a serial rapist and a serial murderer. He is a rumored cannibal, but unconfirmed. He is particularly good at thinking on his feet. He's very cunning and smart in that way, but he is less smart when it comes to politics. So he's smart on his feet in terms of figuring out how to get by, but the big picture stuff, he's kind of stupid. As I was talking about earlier, when he decided to attack Hornwood and marry the woman and torture her, it was shortly after that Sir Roderick arrives to kill him. And he would have been killed if he didn't pull off such a great disguise. And then he managed to convince Theon to let him be his servant. So he's good at sort of getting by, but there are so many times when he easily could have been punished and killed for what he was doing. But somehow he just was really lucky. He also really enjoys playing mind games with people. And he also doesn't seemingly get angry. He doesn't seemingly have rage. Instead, he gets very playful with his revenge. One of Ramsay's favorite tricks is to kill his enemies after they have surrendered to him. He loves to do that. He is also quite fond of the old Bolton custom of flaying his enemies alive. So this is an old, ancient House Bolton custom of flaying their enemies alive, and most Boltons, if any, practice that anymore because it's probably barbaric, but Ramsay loves it. He's like, wait, our ancestors used to flay people alive? I am all over that. He does many cruel things that don't really help him, as I was saying earlier. He has no reason to rape the Jane Poole character or the Sansa character on the TV show. He has no reason to rape her. I mean, why do that? There's no reason for that. If you're really going to try to rule the North and you're eventually going to be warden of the North, wouldn't it serve you to have Arya or Sansa on your side, at least? It just doesn't make any sense. Plus, the Jane Poole or Sansa character could have sacrificed themselves to kill him and said, I'm going to kill him and then I'm going to kill myself. So it just seems reckless to himself, even, to do these things. He had no reason to torture Lady Hornwood. He could have just killed her, one, or he could have just stayed married to her and been the lord of both, the heir to the lord of both Hornwood and Dreadfort. So it's like, why do all this horrible sadistic shit when it doesn't actually even help you? So that's just another part of his character. The way he fights in battle is described. It's not really depicted in the TV show, but he's described as a fierce fighter in battle. But he's also described as being undisciplined. He lacks form or finesse in battle. He is described as wielding his sword like a meat cleaver. I think his dad says he swings that sword like a meat cleaver, which is an interesting visual. Ramsay was never formally taught to fight because, remember, he was raised by a poor woman and not in House Bolton. So he appears to have been taught by the original Reek or Heek character. So this smelly servant was the one that was training him, and so his fighting style is very unconventional and fierce and savage. However, on the TV show, Ramsay is depicted as being a deadly hunter and archer, and he easily kills 6 of his own men within seconds. And so he's quite different in the books and the TV show. This is something that kind of bugs me a lot about TV and movies, is they often make the heroes and the villains into being extremely proficient with weapons and with the whole kung fu influence, which I enjoy. I think has gone a little too far. I mean, they make everyone into these acrobatic, ridiculous fighters that it just would never happen, And I would like to think that Game of Thrones is trying to be at least somewhat accurate to the time, aside from all the magic and the White Walkers and all that stuff. But anyway, in the books, Ramsay is known for his ostentatious taste in clothes, which is definitely not happening in the TV show. In the books, he dresses in velvet, he dresses in silk and satin, and he usually wears the Bolton colors of pink and red. So just imagine that. He normally in the books is dressed in pink and red velvet, silk, and satin clothing. In the TV show, he's definitely not doing that. Okay, so before I get into diagnosis, let's talk about the development of his personality. How did his personality develop? Well, let's look at this. Let's look at what we know. His family, House Bolton, is the flayed. That's their sigil is the flayed man, and they have this history of flaying their enemies alive. Well, it seems, presumably prior to him knowing that he was the son of Roose Bolton, presumably he wasn't flaying people back then. So he started this practice after he knew that he was a Bolton. Well, it's possible that he's overcompensating to become accepted by his father. Imagine this. He's rejected as a bastard boy all his life, and then he finally figures out, wait, I'm the bastard of the lord of this land. And then he goes to Roose Bolton, and Roose Bolton isn't super excited to have this bastard, particularly because at this point he has a son, Demeric, I think his name is, and so at this point Ramsay is like, I'm a bastard son. How can I get my dad to like me? Well, what if I really, really took on the House Bolton practices, like flaying people alive? What if I became really good at that? Well, it's possible that this need to be accepted by his father motivated this and might have created his brain development circumstances that led to him being such a sadistic person later on. Because we're not quite sure that he was a sadistic person growing up. So he definitely became one. But so maybe it was trying to get his dad's attention, trying to get his dad's approval. It's also possible that he was trying to reject his poor, disgraceful childhood by overly identifying with House Bolton, by really identifying with House Bolton, he could reject his shameful childhood. And one of the ways to do that is to become the ultimate Bolton by flaying people alive. So that's just, I think it's a minor hypothesis for me, but it's one. Another, I think, pretty solid hypothesis is genetics. Now, again, all these people are fictional characters, so they don't exist. But, let's say that they do exist. Well, genetics could be a factor. Roose Bolton, Ramsay's biological father, might be a psychopath, might be someone biologically who is prone to psychopathy. You don't have to look too far in Roose Bolton's history to see evidence of psychopathy. He killed the miller. He hung, he sees this woman, he wants to have sex with her. And instead of just being like, oh, well, can't do that. Or even just catcalling her or something, just stick to the normal crappy male behavior. But instead, he kills her husband, hangs him from a tree, and then proceeds to have sex with the woman underneath the hanging husband's body. I mean, you're a sicko. So Roose Bolton might be biologically predisposed to psychopathy, and so therefore he passed on that predisposition to Ramsay, which is, I think definitely a possibility. Also, Ramsay's mother was very likely suffering from a number of psychological issues during her pregnancy, because remember, she's just working one day, and then the Lord of the Land comes by, kills her husband, and then rapes her, and then a month later she's like, "Holy crap, I'm pregnant. My husband's dead. My mill has been taken over by my dead husband's brother. I'm now homeless. I have no money, and I'm pregnant, and I'm grieving the loss of my loved husband." So when we go through that kind of psychological experience, it affects our biology and therefore can affect one's pregnancy. And it's possible that Ramsay Bolton, while in utero, was experiencing issues as a result of the mother's psychological suffering that created the conditions for him to become the person that he became. So I think that's a pretty solid hypothesis right there. Another one of the minor hypotheses is that given that he was a bastard as a child and known to be a bastard, he might have been bullied by other people and therefore wants to get back at everybody by bullying them. Okay, so we have those issues. Another hypothesis is, and this is again pretty solid, I think, is his upbringing and his attachment upbringing. His mother might not have ever really accepted him as her real son. She was raped by this terrible man who killed her husband, and now she is giving birth to this man's son. Well, it's very easy to have somewhat of a complex about that boy. He looks like the evil person. It might threaten the ability to develop the necessary attachment that one needs to develop well. So it's possible that happened. We don't have any indication of that, but it's possible. She was trying to get rid of him frequently, and finally tried to get rid of him when he was about 12 by telling him that he was Roose's son, even though that might have led to her own death. There were several moments where she could have been killed, and she probably knew it, particularly when she told Ramsay that Ramsay was Roose's son. If Ramsay went to the Dreadfort and said, "My mom told me that I'm your son," Roose, given his track record, could have easily just killed the boy at that point and then rode out or sent some men out to kill her, to shut her up. Because again, if Eddard Stark or whoever was in control at the time were to find out about this rape, they could charge Roos with a crime. And so even though Ramsay's mother knew about this threat, she still told Ramsay about the truth because she wanted to get rid of him. So there's a potential here that she wanted to get rid of him for many years, and this is going to affect you. Even if you've got some difficulties, even though you act, like a difficult kid, if you know that your mom is trying to get rid of you, that doesn't bode well for your personality. Also, he's had no father attachment, presumably. There's no talk of a stepfather or anything. And so when you don't have a father attachment, research shows that you are at higher risk for problems in your personality and problems in your adult behavior. Also, when the mother was raising Ramsay, it's likely that she was suffering from PTSD or other trauma-related issues, grief and loss. She was probably depressed, so she was probably not altogether present as a parent. She's also a single mom, and she's struggling with poverty at this point. And when you have only one parent, and that only parent is suffering psychologically, you will often have attachment injuries as a product of that, because you don't feel secure in your attachment to the one person that you're supposed to feel secure with. So then later, when Roos finally does take him in, Ramsay knows that he's not good enough. He's a bastard boy, and that would also affect the way your personality formed as a teenager, knowing that you're a second-rate human being. That must have hurt him, and so that's going to affect his personality as well. Okay, so another factor that might have played a role in the development of Ramsay Bolton's personality might have been the effect of reek/heat, the first reek. His personality might have played an important role in the development of Ramsay's later development in the teen years. Because Reek smelled so bad since he was born, Reek was rejected as a child in all likelihood throughout his life. And Reek probably gained acceptance from other people by being a loyal servant. He might have learned that the only way he is going to get any kind of positive social accolades or attention is to be a loyal servant and to not assert his own needs or not to be a pest to anybody. So he probably internalized important internal representation, the first Reek. He probably internalized a common interaction between him and others, maybe particularly his parents, in which, in order to gain love, he had to be a subhuman. He had to be something that was contemptible and also someone that was very loyal and subservient. And as he internalized this experience, as we all do, he might have recreated it in his important relationships in his life later on in life. We don't know how old the original Reek was, but at the very least, we know that he was at least a teenager at the time, if not quite a bit older. And as he comes into contact and has a significant relationship with Ramsay, he might have socialized Ramsay to agree with a projective identification. When we have internal strife psychologically between different internalized elements, we will externalize them sometimes through projective identification, through enactments, as a way of trying to alleviate the inner pain. Now, of course, it doesn't usually work if it is done in the typical dysfunctional way to actually alleviate any sort of conflict and pain or psychic pain. But it does have a fantasy of relief in it. So he might have socialized Ramsay to abuse him and reject him, to treat him as a subhuman. he might have socialized Ramsay, or Reek might have socialized Ramsay to treat him this way as a way of trying to secure his relationship with Ramsay because he really wanted Ramsay to accept him. But he was also recreating a painful part of his past with Ramsay. And this was probably difficult for Reek. And in this interaction, it creates an internalization for Ramsay in which he internalizes a relationship in which he is dominant, in which Ramsay is abusing someone. And this is his version of love and attention as well. Ramsay, as any other human, needs love, needs connection, needs attachment. And here he is with perhaps one of his very first important attachments outside of his mother, and it involves a tremendous amount of abuse, rejection, and dominance. So he internalized this, and then Ramsay then is left to struggle with this internalization and then proceeds to, through projective identification, defend against this inner turmoil by recreating it in many other relationships later in life, in which Ramsay continues to abuse people and reject them and make them feel inferior. This is Ramsay's way of eking out some level of attachment and closeness with other human beings. And of course, it's dysfunctional, highly dysfunctional, but it is an hypothesis as to what led to the development of Ramsay's personality. So those are all the main factors psychologically that I can think of off the top of my head regarding the development of Ramsay's personality. We have his perhaps overcompensation to become accepted by his father or by his, House Bolton with the flayed man. We have his potential genetic factors. We have potential bullying as a child, being a bastard child. And in particular, we have his upbringing with his mother and his early attachments, and also his mother being affected from the trauma and loss regarding the circumstances around Ramsay's conception. And we also have his early relationship and attachment with Reek and how Ramsay might have internalized that. So now in the next part of the analysis I want to move to is why do we watch? Why do we as the audience read these books and watch the TV show? And why do we like watching Ramsay on the screen? Why is it so engaging? Because there are other villains that are horrible, that are in TVs and books and TVs, that are in TV shows and books and movies and stuff that don't actually engage us as much as Ramsay does. There are many villains that go unnoticed. So what is it about Ramsay? What is it about Game of Thrones in general, A Song of Ice and Fire in general, that makes it compelling? Well, of course, no one will ever be able to answer that question. But, so I'll just end it there. No, just joking. I have a few ideas, speculations to answer this question, and specifically around Ramsay and maybe even Joffrey as well. We keep watching because we want satisfaction and we want revenge against Ramsay and Joffrey. We eventually had satisfaction when Joffrey died. But I don't know about you, but when Joffrey died, spoiler alert, it wasn't as satisfying as I was hoping it would be. It happened rather quickly. He died in a very painful, agonizing manner. It didn't look pretty, but it only lasted for 30 seconds or something. You would want Joffrey to suffer for years. Perhaps what Cersei Lannister is heading into. But even that, it just doesn't seem... You just want someone to really, really suffer for... I don't know. Maybe I'm just a terrible person, but that's just me. And I think we keep watching Game of Thrones partially because we can't wait for Ramsay to get his just dessert, as they say. But there's really no evidence that George R. R. Martin is going to give us that. There are very few examples of happy endings in the storyline, and there are more examples of horrible endings to plot lines and people in this story. I mean, let's look at the evidence. Eddard, the undeniable hero and star of the first book in the first season of the TV show, he is honorable. He's good. He is, you just want to see him kick ass, and he's beheaded by Joffrey rather unceremoniously. Khal Drogo, at first, we're a little scared of him, but we eventually learn to really like him, and we see his relationship with Daenerys develop, and he lets her ride him, and Khal Drogo turns out to be a big teddy bear, a very capable warrior teddy bear, but a teddy bear nonetheless. If I'm remembering right, maybe I'm remembering Khal Drogo falsely, but that's my memory anyway. And he's a super macho dude, and he's powerful, but he's ultimately he ultimately dies from a minor wound that gets infected. He just gets a nick. And over time, just, is what happened in the old days. An infection set in, and then he died. So he didn't even die in a wonderful way. Same with Eddard. He just gets beheaded by an executioner, even when he didn't really expect to. Khal Drogo dies from an infection. King Robb Stark, the next hero after Eddard, you figure, well, surely they won't kill Robb. I mean, they killed Eddard. Robb's gonna at least live for a while. No, he's executed rather unceremoniously by Roose Bolton in the Freys during the Red Wedding, right? And then you have Prince Oberyn Martell, the Viper. He has his head smashed in by the mountain. That was horrible too. You have Ygritte, Jon Snow's girlfriend, the wildling. She dies. It was a wonderful death, I have to say, but she dies very, very quickly. King Renly Baratheon dies from when he gets killed by Melisandre's ghost baby. A lot of people were rooting for Renly Baratheon after King Robert died. You're thinking, among all the 5 kings, Renly seems like the one that we want to live. He is gay in the show, and so you figure maybe George R. R. Martin will take it easy on the gay kid, but nope, he gets killed too. Catelyn Stark, the ultimate mother figure on the show, she's killed unceremoniously by the Boltons and the Freys. Although, if you're a reader of the books, I'll just leave it there. Okay. King Stannis Baratheon, who many people were rooting for toward the end. He, was we weren't necessarily rooting for him in the beginning, but toward the end, you're in season 5, you're just like, well, surely this guy will last a little longer. But he's likely been killed by Ramsay's men in the books, and defeated by Ramsay's men in the TV show, and then seemingly killed by Brienne. And then, of course, Jon Snow, the ultimate hero and star of the show from the very beginning. He's the guy that everyone identifies with, seemingly. And he's killed unceremoniously by his own allies, by his fellow soldiers. He is killed for seemingly crappy reasons. Although, if you're reading the news, it would seem as though Jon Snow is not really dead. So, maybe we can count on Jon Snow surviving. And if you've played the Telltale game, which I highly recommend, the Game of Thrones video game made by Telltale, they are a choose your own adventure game. They're not action. It's more like watching an episode of Game of Thrones where you get to participate in some of it. It's really amazing. I highly recommend it. And if you've played that game, you realize that there are several that instead of following the Stark family, the video game follows the Forrester family. And this is a George R.R. Martin endorsed product, so it fits completely in the universe. In fact, Dinklage does voicing the woman who does Cersei. She does voicing the Marjorie. The actress that's Marjorie. She does voiceover for it and plays their characters. There's several people, so it's very much like just. In fact, if you're a Game of Thrones fan, you really just should play this game because it fills out some of the story, and you get to see other scenes essentially that's happening in the world of Game of Thrones. For instance, during the Red Wedding, you're there, and you have another kind of mission to take care of at that wedding, and you don't see the actual Red Wedding, or not Red Wedding, sorry, the wedding in which, wait, am I getting my terminology? What was the wedding called in which Joffrey died? No, that's not Red Wedding. What am I talking about? The Purple Wedding. That was called the Purple Wedding. That's the wedding that he died in. Anyway, they like to call, a lot of people die in weddings and they assign colors to them. So, why did they call it the Purple Wedding? Is it because his face turned purple because he was choking to death? Probably. That's probably why it's called. His face turned purple. So it's called the Purple Wedding. Anyway, you're a character and you're at the Purple Wedding, and you have something you have to do socially because you're trying to fight for your Forrester family, not the Stark family. And anyway, so in the game, you play several of these Forrester family kids, and just like the Stark family, there's like 6 or 7 of them. And spoiler alert, but many of the characters die. Many of the main characters in this family die. It's worse than the Stark family, frankly. And so even the video game, where normally in video games you win, right? Or at least you have a chance to win. In this Game of Thrones Telltale game, you lose pretty much all the time. Like, I think it was the second season. They call them seasons. They don't call them like different versions. I think I just finished the second season not too long ago, and it's just getting worse and worse for the Forresters too. So there's really no evidence that George R.R. Martin is going to give us satisfaction with Ramsay, or with Daenerys, or with Jon Snow. There's not a lot of evidence of that. Now, I keep thinking this must have somewhat of a happy-ish ending at the end. I mean, this can't end on a horrible note. I mean, people are going to riot in the streets if Ramsay doesn't get his just dessert, right? But I've thought that before, and Martin has proceeded to just make it worse and worse for us. So I personally, I should analyze Martin, honestly, because what makes it so easy for him to kill off our most favorite characters? Presumably Martin loves these characters too, right? And he just loves putting people through crap. Maybe he's slightly masochistic himself, or even sadistic himself. Anyway, so there's a chance also that I think, which is definitely a factor, is that just think about the movie or the TV show or the books without Ramsay Bolton. Without Ramsay Bolton, say Ramsay dies somehow. Well, then who are you going to fight against? Who's the main person you're going to fight against? Certainly there are other people that are quote unquote evil, but the show really needs that element of a villain like this. And I want to remind people that this sort of villainy is actually quite accurate to history and the time. When you see things like Star Wars, it's like, it's fun fantasy. But when you watch when you watch TV shows like Game of Thrones and read books like this. It's loosely based on things that actually happened in history, and that's what makes it so much more interesting to me when you are, as I said before, a mild history amateur buff. You just learn how fascinating history is, and to see a show like this that somewhat mirrors what happened in our history is quite satisfying to me. Okay, so let's talk about the diagnosis. How would I diagnose Ramsay? Well, with Joffrey, it was a little bit more difficult compared to Ramsay. Ramsay's very easy to diagnose, to tell you the truth. With Joffrey, it was a little harder because Joffrey was much younger, remember, and it's harder to diagnose children, and Joffrey was 11 or 12, because they're still developing their personalities. They don't necessarily have a clear sense of self. They're easily influenced. And so with Ramsay, it's easier because he's an adult by the time we see him in the story. Also, Joffrey might have just been suffering from a tremendous amount of insecurity, and he might have been just massively misguided. But with Ramsay, Ramsay is clearly pathological. He particularly because no one really wants him to be doing these things. You could have argued that Joffrey felt pressure to assert his dominance or something. But with Ramsay, there are so many times where he's clearly doing dysfunctional, antisocial things just because he likes it. And there's a lot of reasons why he shouldn't be doing it. Like the whole story about as he hunts that girl down and Sir Roderick comes upon him. He was just hunting this girl down because he thought it'd be fun, and he very likely knew that there was a chance he was going to be brought to justice by somebody. And so this is stronger evidence that he was acting on his own volition. It wasn't just some insecurity or he wasn't being influenced. This was emerging from within him. Okay, so let's look at the main diagnostic behaviors first. He hunts girls with reek. He hunts them down and kills them and rapes them and flays them. He kills his half-brother because his half-brother is a competitor. Now, there's some debate as to whether that is the true thing that happened, but, anyway. Ramsay marries, imprisons, tortures, and kills Lady Hornwood to get her lands. He tortures and enslaves Theon. He takes pleasure in raping and torturing other people. He takes his time with it. He is a methodical, well thought out torturer of other human beings. He revels in it. He purposely keeps people alive so he can make them suffer for days or years. He will keep someone alive. That is really quite particular because there are people who have the tendency to harm other people, but at some point they will have some tinge of humanity and compassion and will put the person out of their misery. Now, this is not a good thing, but overall, but for most people, even most psychopaths, they have some shred of humanity and will not torture. At some point in the days of torturing someone, they will have second thoughts. Ramsay doesn't have evidence of a second thought at any point. So this is another thing to take notice of. He also, as I said, basically, he doesn't show any remorse. There's never an ounce of remorse. He seemingly doesn't even understand the possibility of remorse. When Roose talks to him and says, hey, why don't you lighten up here because this is a problem, Ramsay seems to, his response, he just indicates that he just doesn't have any remorse. There's just no remorse. Okay, so when we see behaviors like this, we immediately look at cluster B personality disorders. He's definitely one of the cluster B, right? And there are 4 in cluster B. There's histrionic, borderline, narcissistic, antisocial. Histrionic, borderline, if you know those diagnoses, you know that he doesn't fit those very well. The 2 that he really seems to fit in the DSM are narcissistic and antisocial. And let's look at narcissistic first. And my main hypothesis, or my main thesis here, is that he, to some extent, fits narcissistic personality disorder, but he doesn't fit the common profile, and he much better fits the antisocial profile. And when I talk to people that don't treat these sorts of disorders and don't have experience, and I'll say, what do you think? Do you think narcissistic, antisocial? They'll often say, oh, he's both, because I think for many people, when they hate someone, they just want to they just want to label them with every bad label. And they think, well, if I say he's not narcissistic, I'm basically saying that he's not a problem in life. And so that's just when you're diagnosing an important bias to consider. So by me saying he does not suffer from narcissistic personality disorder, I'm not saying that his behavior is not problematic. And I'm also not saying that he doesn't have narcissistic elements, if not full-blown major portions of his personality are narcissistic. But if we are to accurately diagnose him, we have to remain as unbiased as we possibly can, and he doesn't fit the profile. So anyway, let's just go through some of the criteria for narcissistic. Well, first off, a need for admiration is typical to narcissistic personality. And yeah, he sort of needs admiration at times, but it doesn't really fit the flavor of the typical narcissistic personality disordered person. Number 2, a lack of empathy. Absolutely. There's really no ifs, ands, or buts about that one. He lacks empathy, as many narcissistic people do. Does he exaggerate his achievements? Not really. He's not really a boaster. He's not shy about his achievements, but when you know a narcissistic person, you know that they have a particular flavor of exaggerating their achievements, and Ramsay doesn't really fit that. Does he expect and or require recognition and admiration all of the time? Well, again, sort of. He kills people for not recognizing how great he is. Someone called him, after he was made Ramsay Bolton by King Tommen, he ran into someone who didn't know that yet and had called him Ramsay Snow. And so Ramsay Bolton killed him or her because of that. So you could say he needs and requires recognition and admiration, but, I think he would just use any excuse to kill someone, and it's not really necessarily because they don't give him admiration. Is he preoccupied with unlimited power? Not really. Does he like power? Absolutely. But he again doesn't fit the flavor of a person who's preoccupied with unlimited power. What you will hear from people who suffer from narcissistic personality disorder is this preoccupation. It's something they think about and talk about a lot, and all of their efforts, sometimes literally all of their efforts, go into acquiring power, and whatever that means to them and their culture around them, whether that means moving up the corporate ladder or getting more money or whatever markers are in their cultural pocket, they will be obsessed with. And seemingly everything will spawn from that for them. And Ramsay doesn't have that. If he was truly dedicated to unlimited power, he would actually curb his sadism, because his sadism, as Roos would tell him, is getting in the way of ultimate power in the North. So he doesn't fit this criteria. Does he believe he is special and can only be understood by other special people? No, that he doesn't fit this criteria at all, really. Does he believe he's special? Yeah, probably. Does he have a sense of entitlement? Yeah, you could say that. But again, if you know people with narcissism, you would know that people with narcissism have a particular flavor of believing they are special and can only be understood by other special people. They will tend to, if they go to a party, they will tend to discount anyone in the party that doesn't have any outward display of being special themselves. And they will only seek the opinions, or they'll only value the opinions of very special people in the room, and they'll compete with that person. They'll be envious of that. There's just this obsession and preoccupation with the specialness of themselves and the specialness of other people. And if you know a narcissistic person, you know what this is like. If you don't know if none of these narcissistic traits are really jumping out at you as someone you know, then in all likelihood, you're narcissistic. Just joking. It's late in the podcast, so excuse me. But no, if you can't think of someone that really fits these criteria, then lucky you, because you haven't come across someone like this. But it's really quite particular. And unless you know someone like this, don't assume that you could even imagine how extreme they can be in this area. A few more narcissistic personality traits. Exploitative. They will typically be exploitative. Yeah, he's somewhat. I mean, well, yes, he's very exploitative, but not in a narcissistic sense. Is he envious of others? Well, not kind of, right? He wanted the lands of the Hornwood lands, and he took that. So, yeah, you could say there's some of that. Is he arrogant? Sort of, but not in the narcissistic way. Now again, some of you are saying, I can't believe that you are calling this guy not arrogant and not exploitative of other people. He is very exploitative. He is very entitled. He is very arrogant. And what I have to say is, again, yes, he doesn't care about other people's feelings, and I would not call him not arrogant, but if you know someone with narcissistic personality disorder, you know that the degree at which these people are arrogant and the degree at which they have a sense of entitlement is so much greater than the personality presentation of Ramsay Bolton. You'll understand that Ramsay doesn't really fit narcissistic personality disorder. So just be careful about that kind of stuff. And this is partially why in the clinical world that a lot of misdiagnosing takes place, is that people have a hard time understanding the degree at which things need to be met in order for them to meet criteria, and particularly around personality disorders. If you're a trainee or just someone who doesn't know much about personality disorders, you have to understand that the only people, and I'm not just saying this because I'm one of these people. I'm saying this because it's true, is that only people that are experienced at diagnosing personality disorders can diagnose personality disorders. I've said this before in other podcasts, but if you want to diagnose depression or panic attack, or you want to diagnose, I'm not going to put ADHD in there because actually that's probably not true, but adjustment disorders, these kinds of things. These are, particularly depression, I would say, these are easy things to identify in yourself and other people. If you just ran down the criteria of major depressive disorder, it's pretty hard to mistake what the diagnosis is getting at. When it comes to ADHD, it gets a little bit more difficult because, again, degree and flavor come into account. When it comes to personality disorders, it is extremely difficult to lock down. Mostly because when you are interacting with someone with a personality disorder, it feels a very particular way. When you interact, or when you have someone in your life that is borderline, they will feel very particular, and they will make you feel a very particular feeling. When you're interacting with someone who's antisocial, same thing. When you're interacting with a psychopath, when you're interacting with someone with narcissistic personality, histrionic, each one of these personality disorders will make you feel a particular way, and those feelings that you have as a person who observes the self and has experience and knows how to interpret human communication, transference, countertransference, as someone who understands that, you now have that ability to diagnose and understand the degree at which some criteria need to be met in order to justify the diagnosis. I said this before when I was talking about Donald Trump. Some people were saying he has narcissistic personality disorder, and I listened to podcasts and stuff or other media discussions, and they'll say Donald Trump has narcissistic personality disorder. Or I had listened to this other podcast where this guy, I think it was what's it called, the Cracked podcast, and the main host O'Brien was talking about how our culture is now filled with people with narcissistic personality disorder. And he didn't just say that in passing. He was saying it over and over again, that our culture now suffers from narcissistic personality disorder. And I was just rolling my eyes, because it's such an ignorant thing to say, because narcissistic personality disorder is very particular. Now, if you want to say narcissism is on the rise and you want to define narcissism as a particular thing, then fine. And if you can measure that, then great. But narcissistic personality disorder is very particular. And when you know someone with this disorder, you will feel very different, and you will suddenly see the degree at which narcissistic traits can actually, the degree at which they can go, how high they can actually go, the degree. There are some people that have, some narcissism. Frankly, I have narcissistic personality traits, but I don't have narcissistic personality disorder. But I have some narcissistic traits. Like, for instance, I have this podcast in which I talk about things and act like I know what I'm talking about all the time. That is a narcissistic behavior. I would say that 99.9% of podcasters have narcissistic traits. Why else would we be so compelled, particularly when we get no money for it or very little money for it, why would it be so compelled to yammer into a microphone and make everyone listen to us? Well, it's because we have a narcissistic need compared to other people. And there are pros and cons to that personality trait. The pro is that I have a podcast, I suppose. And the con is that sometimes when I'm at dinner parties, I talk too much. And people think, boy, that guy talks too much. Because in the moment, I'm so wrapped up in my own head and so wrapped up in what I want to say and so wrapped up in wanting other people to listen to my scintillating thoughts that I lose sight of the fact that no one else really wants to hear any of that. So that's narcissism. That's being narcissistic compared to the average human being. But I am nowhere near the criteria for narcissistic personality disorder. So to have narcissistic traits, and so when the Cracked podcast, O'Brien's talking about narcissism rising in our culture, fine, you can say that. But to say narcissistic personality disorder is on the rise or 100% prevalent in our culture now is just eye-rolly to me. So if you're a clinician and you want to understand personality disorders, then just start interacting with more clients, particularly difficult clients, because narcissistic personality disordered clients will be difficult in all likelihood. And if you're a family therapist, you might, for instance, so this is just a suggestion, a mom brings in a teenager, and the mom says, I want you to treat my son. And you start to assess the situation, and you learn that the parents are divorced or they're together and they're in conflict. Well, a common thing for people to do, in my experience, is to take the easy road. And okay, I'll treat the teenage boy. we'll meet for an hour every 1 or 2 weeks, and I'll work on his self-esteem, and he'll complain about his family, and I'll think about, boy, he's dealing with some tough stuff in his family, and that'll be that. Well, I challenge you to invite both of the parents in, because a lot of the times, what you will find, not a majority, but some of the time, you will find that one of the parents has a personality disorder, and they are not seeking treatment for themselves because they don't think anything's wrong with them. And as you engage with this person, you will get a very particular feeling from this person. And you will start to see, oh, I understand how this system works. And I understand how each person and their personality comes together in the system. And you'll have an ability to have an effect on that system. Will you be able to cure that person, that parent, of the personality disorder? No. But you can help the system change to be more functional, given that someone has a personality disorder in that system. I'm going way off topic, so I will rein it back in. Okay. So we looked at 3 of the cluster Bs. We have histrionic, borderline, narcissistic. Now let's look at antisocial, the 4th of the cluster B. This is the most fitting diagnosis for Ramsay Bolton. Remember that it's similar to psychopathic personality disorder, which is not in the DSM. Most people outside of psychology and people in psychology will tend to use the term psychopathy or psychopath instead of antisocial personality disorder. But in the more official language of psychology and therapy, antisocial is the preferred term for most people. And it's also similar to sociopathic personality and dissocial personality disorder. Also, it shouldn't be confused with asocial. Antisocial in the general public, they use that word to mean asocial, meaning that someone is not very social, someone who's introverted or stays home a lot. They'll call that antisocial, but actually antisocial means against social norms or rules, and meaning that the opposite of social rules. So you have antisocial and prosocial. So to give to a charity or to hug someone who wants to be hugged, these are prosocial behaviors. To flay someone alive, this is an antisocial behavior. Okay, so antisocial personality disorder is defined in the DSM-5 as mainly a disregard and violation of the rights of others occurring since the age of 15. This very much typifies Ramsay Bolton's behavior. Since the age of 15 and before, he has a massive disregard and is a massive violator of the rights of other people. That is very fitting to him. And we need at least 3 of the following criteria met in order to apply the diagnosis, the diagnostic label of antisocial. And he has all of them. So not only does he have at least 3 of the following, he has all of them. And those are illegal behavior. He definitely acts illegally, right? Now, it's sort of funny in the Westeros world because they have different kinds of laws, but he doesn't follow the social law that you don't kill and rape innocent people. He does that frequently. Okay. Is he deceitful? Does he lie? Does he disguise himself? And does he con other people? Does he manipulate other people for his own gain? All the time. He lies frequently. He disguises himself sometimes. When he tried to get out of the murder, he disguised himself as Reek. And does he manipulate and con people? Yes, he is very manipulative and effective in this way, right? He manipulated everyone into keeping him alive and believing he was Reek, and then getting on Theon's good side. And then, anyway, so he's very deceitful. Is he impulsive? Yes, he's quite impulsive. He does what he wants. Particularly in the Telltale video game, he is seemingly impulsive and horrible. But honestly, he, in comparison to, shall we say, real people with antisocial, is not as impulsive as real people. Antisocial people that I have known are particularly impulsive. They will act seemingly without any known guide to their behavior. And they'll get in fights a lot. They'll say nasty things to people. They will make sudden decisions. And it basically, because they don't have empathy for other people, they don't follow the normal rules in life. So for the rest of us that aren't antisocial, we have a healthy amount of empathy for others, and so that'll guide our behavior. So if we're out at the grocery store and someone gets in our way, we will get upset, and there will be a part of us that might have some anger and even rage, but we refrain from doing something harmful to that person because there's a part of us, one, that doesn't want to harm another human being, but there's also another part of us that doesn't want to be humiliated in society. We don't, if we were to push that person down, we worry about what other people around would say about us. So we have empathy for the tribe. We worry about what they think about us. Well, antisocial people don't necessarily care. This is the difference between narcissism and antisocial. Is narcissistic people very much care about how society sees them. They're preoccupied with that. But with antisocial, they don't care about that because they don't think they're special. They just simply lack empathy for other people and they just don't care. And so it's not even on their radar, and it doesn't affect them the way it affects us. And so they will act very impulsively as a result. It'll seem impulsive to us, but in reality to them, it's just they're acting on another set of rules that says that, why would you care about what other people think? It would be, let's see if I can come up with an analogy. It'd be like when you are walking down a street in the summertime and there are occasional ants underneath your feet and you occasionally step on an ant on accident. Well, if the ant community could see that, they would be horrified at what you just did. You just, walking down the sidewalk, you didn't even care to look down at your feet, and you stepped on 5 ants in the process of walking down the street. You have no remorse, and you're so impulsive. Like, you should have looked down and you should have walked around these ants. Like, that's so impulsive of you. Well, you don't think of yourself as being impulsive, do you? You just think of yourself as like, I'm just walking on the street and I didn't even see the ants there. And I don't even know why are all these ants getting angry at me all of a sudden? Well, it's a bad analogy. Sometimes when I say analogies, like, I just wonder, like, what's going to come out of my mouth? And it's just like off the top of my head. But I think it's to some extent getting my point across in that the impulsiveness issue, I think, is attributed not to, say, ADHD, which is an executive function issue that leads to impulsivity. I think it's to people outside of the antisocial world, it seems impulsive because they simply just don't care. They don't have the same editing system to their behavior, and so it seems impulsive anyway. Is he aggressive? Boy, oh boy, yes, he is just terribly aggressive. Does he have disregard for the safety of others? Holy crap, yes he does. Is he irresponsible? This one, he meets kind of irresponsible. Again, antisocial people in the real world tend to be extremely irresponsible in general. This is something that antisocial psychopaths in the TV and books aren't really normal. Often the psychopaths in stories are very responsible and very cunning and very smart and they always seem to get their way. Well, the vast majority of psychopaths and people who suffer from antisocial personality disorder do not in the end actually get what they want. Because they lack empathy, they actually, to some extent, lack the ability to figure out how to make things good for themselves because they can't necessarily predict how other people are going to act because they don't have empathy. And so they can act very irresponsibly, even for themselves. They can drink a lot. There's a lot of substance abuse in the cluster Bs, and they can act very irresponsible. So, losing a job, going to jail every now and then, not being very good with money, not taking care of people around you. So Ramsay Bolton doesn't really exhibit this. In some ways, he's actually quite responsible. And so he doesn't really fit this one. And the last one is lack of remorse and empathy. And he absolutely misses or meets this criteria. In my opinion, the antisocial personality disorder criteria in the DSM, lack of remorse and empathy should really be something that needs to be met. So again, in the DSM, the main criterion is disregard and violation for the rights of others occurring since the age of 15. Well, in my mind, that should be replaced with a consistent lack of remorse and empathy for other people that results in the disregard and violation of rights of others. Because you can, and this happens, make an argument for many people having antisocial that don't actually, in my mind, fit the spirit behind the diagnosis. For instance, I've talked about this before, I think, is someone grows up in a bad neighborhood, like a very bad neighborhood. There are famous bad neighborhoods in the United States, and just think of a young black man, a young black kid growing up in these neighborhoods. Well, he's being discriminated against. He has a lot of danger around him. There are people getting shot and killed and mugged and beat up, and there's gangs. And so he learns that the only way to survive is to fight back and assert your manliness and assert how you're willing to throw down like the best of them. And so you start to throw down. You start to fight, and you start to retaliate. And someone, attacks someone in your neighborhood, and you and some other friends go to the other neighborhood and you strike back, because if you don't strike back, the other neighborhood is just they're going to know that you're punks, and they're going to know that they can walk all over you. And that means very, very bad things for you and your friends and your families. And so you will, in the process of engaging in that process, that very normal, understandable, natural process, you will disregard and violate the rights of others. You will go to this other neighborhood and you will do a drive-by shooting, or you will mug someone's sister, or you're going to do bad things, and that's the context in which someone lives. Now, am I excusing it? No, it's a complicated thing, but that boy could absolutely have a normal personality, one that does not have a disorder, one in which he does absolutely have empathy for other people, one in which he absolutely has a conscience and he absolutely has remorse when things happen. Even when he does those things that he participates in, he has remorse. So according to the DSM, he could fit the criteria because you only need 3 of the following things. So again, this black kid, is he doing stuff that's illegal? Yes. Is he aggressive? Yes. Does he have disregard for the safety of others? Yes. Is he irresponsible? You could make a case he's being irresponsible. So he already meets the criteria for antisocial, but he does have remorse and he does have empathy. And to me, that misses the mark completely. Antisocial, the main hub of everything comes from, in my opinion, the lack of remorse and empathy. It's the same for psychopathy. To be diagnosed as a psychopath, you can meet a lot of the other, because the psychopathy list of criteria is even longer, and you can meet many in a similar way that I just said to antisocial, and yet you can still, a part of your personality, have empathy and remorse for other people. And to me, that just is ridiculous. To me, and I think most people agree, most clinicians agree, that the key element of antisocial well, I don't know if I can say this actually, but many people I talk to, the key element of antisocial psychopathy, sociopathy is the lack of remorse, lack of empathy, and everything stems from there, right? But for many people, these are labels they apply, particularly maybe in the criminal justice system. They apply it to an individual who has just a history of doing illegal behavior. And that, to me, misses the spirit meant behind the term personality disorder. You can commit many different behavioral, problematic behaviors. But unless there's an underlying pervasive personality problem, then they don't fit the diagnostic criteria, in my mind, of a personality disorder. Now, I'm sure if you look more closely at the DSM-5 language, you could find some kind of exception to what I'm saying. But anyway, my point is that when you're looking for the key feature of psychopathy and antisocial, it's this lack of empathy, and that all other things stem from that. It is similar to my thesis that with borderline, everything, there are many different confusing criteria for borderline, even more confusing, way more confusing than antisocial, by the way. But it's my thesis that everything stems from, for borderline people, from a tremendous fear and complex regarding rejection. And once you understand that they're extremely sensitive to rejection, and everything stems from that sensitivity, then it all starts to make sense. The impulsivity, the lack of empathy themselves, the relationship instability, the latching on to someone and then rejecting them. I mean, it all starts to make sense. The suicidality without actual behaviors. It all starts to make sense. And the same with antisocial. If you understand that the key broken element of the personality is a lack of empathy for other human beings, then you understand that a lot of things stem from that. Okay, so that's antisocial. And then we have sadistic personality disorder. This is not in the DSM anymore. It used to be in the DSM-3, and when the DSM-4 came out in the early 90s, they excluded sadistic personality disorder. I don't understand why they got rid of it, because there is no other diagnostic category that describes sadism in the DSM, except for what is in the paraphilic chapter in the DSM-5, which is sexual sadism disorder. But this is just a small percentage of sadistic personality people. So I call for a return of sadistic personality disorder. So we need to add to Ramsay Bolton sadistic personality disorder. So he's antisocial / psychopathic / dissocial personality disorder, and he suffers from sadistic personality disorder. Again, this needs to be added because psychopaths and antisocial personality disorder people are not necessarily sadistic. This is important to understand. When you are a psychopath, this means you don't care about other people's feelings, but it doesn't necessarily mean you desire to harm other people. In fact, the vast majority of people with antisocial and with psychopathy do not actually enjoy harming other people. They will harm others in an instrumental way, meaning that if for instance, you and a psychopath are in competition for a promotion, they will have no problem manipulating the situation in their favor and harm you in the process. But they don't get off on harming you. What they do get off on is getting a promotion like anyone else. They desire promotion just like anyone else, and they don't have any qualms with harming you in the process. Whereas you might actually compete similarly with this person, but you'll feel bad about it on the inside, and you probably won't compete as well because of that empathy. But sadistic personality disordered people actually wake up in the morning, and like the way you crave that cup of coffee in the morning, they crave to harm other people. And this is a personality disorder that should be in the DSM, but it is not. And it should be noted that in movies and TV shows, psychopathy and sadism are often conflated. People often consider psychopathy to be the same as being a sadist, but they're not. They're not the same. They're related and they go hand in hand sometimes, but not usually. And sadistic personality disorder people are actually quite rare. Understand? There are very, very few people that suffer. Maybe that's why they got rid of it. Is that it's very rare. It's very common in the movies and TV though. Okay. Now, as I said before, in DSM-5, sexual sadism disorder is included, and the criteria are over a period of at least 6 months. So, yes, he's been doing sadistic behavior the past 6 months. And it's a recurrent and intense sexual arousal from the suffering of others. So it's unclear if he is getting intense sexual arousal from the suffering of others, or if he is just having intense pleasure from the suffering of others. You'd really have to ask him or study him a little bit more because, he did rape. He does love to rape, but he might just enjoy sex and also have no problem with raping. Whereas a sexual sadist, the only way they can even have sex, or the main way they can even just be aroused, is when someone else is genuinely suffering. Not like normal S&M people who want to play around with S&M. Sexual sadists actually get off on actual harm of other human beings, where it's not a game. These are your rapists. The vast majority, and this is something I just really want to make sure everyone understands, because I don't think people really get it, because there's a notion out there that men, if given the chance, would rape if they could. And the fact is that is just not the case. That is not the case. For the vast majority of people, including men, they could never rape someone because they have a normal level of empathy, and they could never be sexually aroused in the context of them harming another human being. Now, are there situations in which non-sadists rape people? Absolutely. When people are drunk, and I've talked about before when you deprive young men of any kind of physical affection and warmth and love, and they get drunk at a party, and they're just like, they just need human connection, and they don't know how to get it. And they're just so desperate, and they're unhinged, and they have a group of other boys around them. Can they turn to rape? Yes. But what you'll find is those boys will wake up the next morning and feel terrible about it. A sexual sadist will wake up in the morning and go, oh my God, that was great. I want to do it again. And I want to do it again. I want to do it again. And so it's sexual sadism. So antisocial is rare. Sadistic personality disorder is even rarer, and sexual sadism disorder is a part of sadistic personality disorder. So anyway, pretty dark stuff, isn't it? Let's read some quotes to close out this long-ass episode. Let's read some quotes. I think it's from the TV show. Ramsay, he is talking to Reek here, and he says, "Strip off their skins. Lord Bolton, he used to say a naked man has few secrets, but a flayed man has none." So he's talking about his dad here. He's saying, my dad used to say that a naked man has few secrets, but a flayed man has no secrets. So that's pretty brutal there. All right. Ramsay is now talking to Theon Greyjoy in this quote, and he says, "Ramsay Snow, my wife called me this before she ate her fingers, but I say Bolton." So, there's that one. And as Ramsay is sacking Winterfell, remember he decide when he takes out Sir Roderick, and then Theon lets him into Winterfell, and then he suddenly turns on Theon. He says, "Save me the phrase and burn the rest. Burn it all." He burns down Winterfell. Here's Ramsay Bolton talking to Theon again. "If you think this has a happy ending, you haven't been paying much attention." That's such a great line. If you think this is going to have a happy ending, then you haven't been paying very much attention. Okay, again, Ramsay saying to Theon as he flays his right pinky, "This isn't happening to you for a reason. Well, one reason, I enjoy it." So this really plays into his sadistic personality. "This isn't happening to you for a reason. Well, one reason, I enjoy it." So that sadistic fucker. Okay, here's a conversation between Theon. A lot of conversations between Theon and Ramsay. Theon Greyjoy, he says, "Please, mercy, mercy." And then Ramsay says, "This is mercy. I'm not killing you. Just making a few alterations." As he cuts off his finger and his dong. Here's when Ramsay is talking to Theon after he cuts off his dong. Ramsay talking. "People talk about phantom limbs. An amputee might have an itch where his foot used to be. So I've always wondered, do eunuchs have a phantom cock? The next time you think about naked girls, will you feel an itch? Sorry, I shouldn't make jokes. My mother taught me not to throw stones at cripples. But my father taught me aim for their head." Oh, I don't know why I'm laughing. It's so awful. Maybe that's why I like the show and others too. It's just, I don't know, there's something comical about a sadist, I suppose. All right, here's again Ramsay talking when he is flaying a man, someone that he's flaying, I think alive. "Did you know my ancestors wore the skins of their enemies as a coat?" So he's educating this man about the history of his house as he flays him by pointing out that his ancestors used to wear the skin of their enemies. All right, here's another one. Ramsay is saying, "And if it's a boy," he's talking to his father, what if your new wife has a boy? And Roose Bolton says, "You're worried about your position." Ramsay says, "My position is quite clear. I'm your son until a better alternative comes along." So here Ramsay is highlighting the fact that his father will discard him if Roose has a son with the Frey woman. But everyone knows that Ramsay would just kill the child if it was a boy, so it doesn't matter. Ramsay is now talking to Reek as Ramsay forces himself onto Sansa in the TV show. So he's raping Sansa at this point, and he is talking to Theon, and he says, "You've known Sansa since she was a young girl. Now watch her become a woman." Boy, that's pretty dark there. All right, here is Ramsay and Sansa talking. Ramsay says, "I'm Lord Bolton's eldest son," Sansa says, "but you're a bastard. A trueborn will always have the stronger claim." Ramsay says, "I've been naturalized by a royal decree from... ... Sansa interrupts and says, "Tommen Baratheon? Another bastard?" So, touche, Sansa. You got him on that one. Good for you. Here's Roose Bolton talking to Ramsay. He says, his father, "Power tastes best when sweetened by courtesy. You had best learn that if you ever hope to rule." Again, Roose is telling his son, "Look, dude, you gotta be courteous because that's when power really works out the best. So cool your jets on the flaying of cool your jets on the raping and the flaying. If we're gonna rule, stop it." All right, here's Robb Stark talking to Lothar Frey about Ramsay, and he says, "This Ramsay was a monster and a murderer, and he died a coward, or so I was told." And again, remember that Robb Stark was told that Ramsay had died, but in fact, he had not died by Roderick's hand. Roderick had killed Reek, who just looked and dressed like Ramsay. Here's a great quote from Roose. He's talking to Reek / Theon, I think. So Roose Bolton. This is Ramsay's father talking to someone about Ramsay, and he says, "His blood is bad. He needs to be leeched. The leeches suck away the bad blood, all the rage and the pain. No man can think so full of anger. Ramsay, though, his tainted blood would poison even leeches, I fear." So his own father recognizes that there's something wrong with that boy. Okay, here's Theon talking. "I will kill that man." Talking about Ramsay. Theon is saying, "I will kill that man. I swear to the drowned god, to the old gods, the new gods, to every fucking god and every fucking heaven. I will kill that man." Actually, I should mention that the first George R. R. Martin, story I read was something that was written. I think it was written before Game of Thrones. He wrote a short story that was printed in, I think it was Dragon magazine. For you nerds out there, there's a magazine for Dungeons and Dragon lovers called Dragon magazine, and I had a subscription to that magazine because again, super nerd here. And I think George R. R. Martin had written this short story for it, and it was about the Ironborn, and it was about the drowned gods. And it was really interesting because these priests of the drowned god were initiating their new young priests into the church, and the way that they did that was they had this ceremony, and they would go into the sea. They would wade into the sea, and the new recruits would submerge themselves in water. So it's sort of like a baptism. And they would purposely drown themselves until their heart stopped. And then the other priests would pull them out of the water and give them CPR, essentially. And if they were revived, then they were born again, essentially, and they became priests for the drowned god. But if they just died, then it meant that they weren't worthy or something. And the way George Martin writes, it was just an extremely compelling short story. And I didn't usually like to read the short stories in Dragon, but this one I remember it really stuck out to me. Okay, let's just read a couple more quotes here. This is Roose Bolton talking to Ramsay. "I place far too much trust in you." End quote. Here's Cersei Lannister vowing to have Roose and Ramsay flayed after learning they have in their possession Sansa Stark. So it's interesting that Cersei is sort of sticking up for Sansa. So Cersei says to someone, she says, "I will skin him and his bastard like the wretch of their bloody sigil." like that wretch on their bloody sigil. Sorry. "I will skin him and his bastard like that wretch on their bloody sigil." So that's interesting. I wonder if that's foretelling what will happen to Roose and Ramsay. Will Cersei exact revenge for us? They seem to be kind of setting up in the story the possibility for us to like Cersei because she's been suffering so much. You know, that scene where she walks through town naked and everyone's throwing crap at her. Like, it's a good story device to make us sympathize with her to some extent. Although I don't know. Cersei, you can have some love for. Maybe she'll come around, like Jaime did. But anyway, I'm off track here. Anyway, so what's the final word I can say about Ramsay Bolton? The final thing I'll say is that as a character, again, I've realized he's much more complex than I originally thought. There are definitely reasons or things you can point to in his history as to why he developed antisocial personality disorder and sadistic personality disorder. But it is somewhat of a mystery. If he were my client or someone I was assessing, and I was to just hypothesize as to the main factors, I would say they are thus: that genetics played a role, that the in utero experience of his development played a role in damaging his nervous system development, that his early childhood attachment, when compounded with his genetic predisposition for antisocial, set the ball rolling, in a sense, to have him never develop a compassion and empathy for other human beings. And by the time Reek came along, he already had the beginnings of antisocial personality disorder and sadism. And Reek just became a convenient target for that when Ramsay was a teenager. That would be my sense, because there are many people that have similar histories in their childhood. There are many people who suffer from abuse, who have mothers who were raped and who were suffering from mental illness as they were raising their children. There are many children that grow up in that circumstance, but do not develop antisocial. So there seems to be emerging evidence that you, to some extent, need to have a biological disposition, whether that's running in your family, because clearly Roos has antisocial traits, if not full-blown disorder. And so there seem to be some genetic roots in this, but also there just can be random genetic realities that occur when a fetus is formed that can, in all likelihood, create the disposition for personality disorder such as this. And so that would be my hypothesis, that genetics meets a mother who is suffering, and God knows what her parenting style was like. You put those two things together and you get a Ramsay. And if you did it 100 other times, you wouldn't have got a Ramsay. But in this instance, the roll of the dice created a Ramsay. And so we now have a wonderful character to hate on the TV show Game of Thrones, and in the books, the book series, A Tale of Ice and Fire, Song of Ice and Fire. It's a terrible name. Anyway. All right. Well, that does it for another episode. Let me know what you think. You can email me at contact@psychologyinseattle.com. Let me know what you think of this. And boy, I can't wait for season 6. People have been watching the preview, or the trailers for season 6, and they're very skeptical. I remember that one trailer with all the masks on the wall. Everyone was getting angry about that one. But I have faith. Mostly because even if the season isn't very good, I just love this story so much. And they have been consistently well produced and well written that I'm positive I'm going to like it. Now, I'm guessing as we move forward, there's going to be a fair amount of people that will start dropping off because they liked the show kind of, but they weren't as much of a fan as I am, and so that's my prediction. I predict that season 6 we're going to see a lot of people starting to turn away from the series. That's just a guess. And I really hope that the story stays well written and the plot is good. I'm really curious what they decide to do with the story, because I'm pretty sure Martin was saying that he wanted to finish this series in 7 books, which would imply there would be, only 2 or 3 more seasons, TV seasons left. It's sort of weird because the TV series is going to come out before the books do. But at the same time, the books are quite a different experience than the TV show. So when the TV show is done and the next couple books come out over the next 10 years, because it takes them forever to write these things, I'll still read the books, because the books just have, not only just is it so much more interesting to read the books, but there's a lot of side plots that don't even get included in the TV show. So anyway, let me know what you think. Contact@psychologyinseattle.com. And if you're a patron, please tell other people about the podcast. And if you're not, then please become a patron of the podcast, because when more people become patrons, I can dedicate more time to doing episodes like this. It took me a long time to prep this episode, I'm going to tell you. As you can tell, I had all these quotes and and it takes a long time. And so if you want other episodes like this, please become a patron by going to patreon.com. All right, well, that does it for this episode. Thanks for joining me. Please take care of yourself and take care of other people and avoid the Ramsays of the world. And if you're a Ramsay, get treatment so that you can be a better citizen of this society, because you deserve that.